The ancient world is filled with places that should have disappeared but didn't. While entire civilizations were erased by war, climate, and time, fragments of their world remained trapped in stone. A staircase leading underground with no known destination. A city built in complete isolation. Symbols carved into walls long after the language behind them was forgotten. In many cases, archaeologists discover the remains first and only later realize how little they actually understand about them. The mystery is not always hidden inside the ruins themselves, but in the silence surrounding them. Why were these places built? What knowledge was lost before history could record it? And how many answers disappeared with the people who once stood there? The deeper we search into the ancient world, the more unfinished it begins to feel. Deep in the barren cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, hundreds of ancient manuscripts were hidden inside caves and left untouched for nearly 2,000 years. Some survived wars, earthquakes, humidity, looters, and the collapse of entire empires. The mystery is not simply that the scrolls survived. The mystery is why they were hidden there at all. Qumran may have looked like an isolated desert settlement, but evidence suggests it once functioned as one of the most important knowledge preservation sites of the ancient world. Qumran lies on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, in one of the driest environments on Earth. Temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius during summer, and annual rainfall is extremely low. At first glance, the location makes little sense for a permanent settlement. Yet archaeologists discovered ruins containing water channels, ritual baths, communal rooms, pottery workshops, and what may have been a scribal center. The site became globally famous in 1947, when a Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat reportedly threw a stone into a cave and heard the sound of breaking pottery. Inside were sealed jars containing ancient scrolls. That accidental discovery triggered one of the greatest archaeological investigations of the 20th century. Over the following years, researchers uncovered more than 900 manuscripts and tens of thousands of fragments scattered across 11 caves near Qumran. Some texts dated back to the 3rd century BCE, making them among the oldest surviving biblical manuscripts ever discovered. But the greatest mystery surrounding Qumran is not the scrolls themselves. It is the scale of knowledge hidden in a place that should never have been capable of producing or protecting it. Archaeologists estimate the settlement may have housed only 100 to 200 inhabitants at its peak, yet the quantity of manuscripts discovered nearby suggests access to an enormous intellectual network. Some texts were copied with astonishing precision, others preserved religious writings, legal codes, calendars, hymns, astronomical observations, and apocalyptic prophecies. The site raises a disturbing question. Was Qumran merely a small religious community, or was it part of a much larger system designed to preserve knowledge before destruction swept across the region? One of the strongest theories connects Qumran to the Essenes, a Jewish sect described by ancient historians such as Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder. The Essenes were said to live in isolated communities, practice ritual purity, and dedicate themselves to sacred writings. Qumran appears to match several elements of those descriptions. Archaeologists discovered multiple ritual baths known as mikvarot, communal dining areas, and what may have been a scriptorium where manuscripts were copied. Inkwells were found inside one room, along with long tables that some scholars believe served as writing desks. The evidence suggests that writing and preserving texts played a central role in the community. But critics argue the settlement was too small and economically weak to create such a vast library on its own. This has led to an alternative theory that the scrolls were brought from Jerusalem and hidden in the caves during the First Jewish-Roman War in the 1st century CE, just before Roman forces destroyed the city. That possibility transforms Qumran into something far more dramatic than a desert monastery. It becomes an emergency archive, a hidden vault created to save knowledge from annihilation. The timing is chilling. Around the year 68 CE, Roman legions advanced through Judea, crushing resistance. Entire towns were destroyed. Refugees fled across the desert. According to many historians, sacred texts may have been removed from Jerusalem before the city fell in 70 CE. The caves near Qumran offered natural protection. The climate around the Dead Sea was exceptionally dry, and the caves remained isolated from moisture and sunlight. Whoever hid the scrolls may have understood that these environmental conditions could preserve organic material for centuries. The preservation itself remains extraordinary. Ancient manuscripts written on parchment or papyrus normally decay rapidly. Humidity, bacteria, insects, and temperature fluctuations destroy them over time. Yet some Dead Sea Scrolls survived for almost 2,000 years in readable condition. Scientists studying the manuscripts discovered that several scrolls were coated with unusual mineral salts. Researchers believe these compounds may have helped stabilize the parchment and slow deterioration. Combined with the hyper-arid climate of the Dead Sea region, the caves effectively became natural preservation chambers. In modern terms, Qumran functioned like a primitive, climate-controlled archive hidden inside the earth. Another mystery emerges from the engineering of the settlement itself. Qumran existed in a hostile desert environment where water was scarce and seasonal floods could become deadly. Despite this, archaeologists uncovered an elaborate hydraulic system consisting of aqueducts, channels, cisterns, and reservoirs cut directly into the terrain. Flash floods from nearby wadis were redirected through carefully designed channels into storage pools capable of sustaining the settlement. Some reservoirs were enormous relative to the size of the community. Their walls were coated with waterproof plaster, and certain basins appear to have served ritual purification purposes. The sophistication of the system has surprised engineers because it required precise calculations involving slope, water pressure, and seasonal flow patterns. Similar hydraulic expertise appeared in places like Petra and Persian Qanat systems, but Qumran demonstrates that even isolated desert communities could develop highly advanced methods of water management. Excavations also revealed evidence of organized pottery production. Hundreds of cylindrical jars similar to those used to store the scrolls were found throughout the site. Their design was unusually specialized. Many featured narrow openings and fitted lids capable of limiting exposure to air and moisture. This suggests the containers were not ordinary household objects. They may have been designed specifically for long-term storage. If true, the people of Qumran were not simply hiding texts. They were engineering survival conditions for information itself. Among all the manuscripts discovered near Qumran, none has generated more speculation than the Copper Scroll. Unlike the other texts written on parchment or papyrus, this document was engraved onto thin sheets of copper. The material choice alone is astonishing. Copper was expensive, difficult to inscribe, and far heavier than traditional writing materials. Yet someone considered the contents important enough to preserve in metal. When scholars finally deciphered the scroll, they found what appeared to be a list of hidden treasures buried across Judea. The text described enormous quantities of gold and silver, supposedly concealed in secret locations. To this day, none of the treasures has been conclusively found. Some researchers believe the scroll records actual temple wealth hidden before the Roman invasion. Others think it may have been symbolic or ritualistic. But the existence of the Copper Scroll raises a disturbing possibility. Qumran was not only protecting religious knowledge, it may also have been safeguarding strategic information intended to survive the destruction of an entire civilization. The archaeological history of Qumran is filled with major discoveries that gradually reshaped scholarly understanding of the ancient world. After the first cave was discovered in 1947, archaeologists Roland Devoe and Gerald Lancaster Harding began systematic excavations during the 1950s. They uncovered communal halls, pottery kilns, staircases descending into ritual baths, and large water cisterns carved into bedrock. Devoe concluded that the settlement had been occupied by a disciplined religious group deeply connected to the scrolls. His interpretation dominated scholarship for decades. Later excavations introduced new debates. Some archaeologists argued the site may originally have been a fortress before evolving into a religious center. Others suggested it functioned partly as a ceramic production facility due to the large number of pottery fragments discovered there. Scientific analysis of the scrolls continues even today. Infrared imaging, multispectral photography, and artificial intelligence have been used to reconstruct damaged fragments and identify handwriting patterns invisible to the naked eye. In some cases, scholars discovered that fragments once believed unrelated actually belong to the same manuscript. DNA testing on parchment has even been used to determine which animal skins were used in production, allowing researchers to trace the geographic origins of certain texts. These technologies transformed the Dead Sea Scrolls from ancient artifacts into a living archaeological puzzle still unfolding in laboratories around the world. In the scorching plains of southwestern Iran, a massive pyramid of baked mud bricks has survived for more than 3,000 years in conditions that should have destroyed it centuries ago. Tchogha Zanbil was not built from granite like the pyramids of Egypt, nor carved into mountains like Petra. It was built mostly from fragile earth exposed to brutal heat, seasonal flooding, salt erosion, and time itself. Yet the core of the structure still stands. Even more unsettling is the civilization behind it. The Elamites once rivaled Babylon and Assyria, controlled major trade networks across the ancient Near East, and engineered one of the most sophisticated sacred cities of the Bronze Age. Today, most people have never even heard their name. Tchogha Zanbil rises from the Khuzestan plain near the ancient city of Susa in modern-day Iran. The site was founded around 1250 BCE by the Elamite king Untashnaparisha, who attempted to create an enormous religious capital dedicated to the gods Inshushinak and Naparisha. Unlike many ancient cities that evolved gradually over centuries, Tchogha Zanbil appears to have been planned almost entirely from the beginning. Concentric defensive walls surrounded temples, royal compounds, storage areas, and at the center stood a colossal ziggurat, originally reaching nearly 50 meters high. For thousands of years, the city disappeared beneath desert soil until accidental discoveries connected to oil exploration in the 1930s brought attention to strange inscribed bricks emerging from the ground. French archaeologist Roman Gershman later led large-scale excavations beginning in 1951, uncovering one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever found in the ancient Near East. The greatest mystery surrounding Tchogha Zanbil is not simply the scale of the ziggurat, it is the impossible survival of its engineering. Most mud brick structures from the Bronze Age collapsed long ago into unrecognizable mounds. Even in Mesopotamia, where mud brick was common, constant restoration was required to keep temples standing. Yet Tchogha Zanbil endured more than 3 millennia, with major portions still recognizable today. Archaeologists discovered that the Elamites combined sun-dried mud bricks with layers of fired bricks placed strategically throughout the structure. Many of these baked bricks were engraved with cuneiform inscriptions, naming Untashnaparisha and invoking divine protection. The precision of the brickwork suggests not random stacking, but a carefully calculated structural system designed to distribute weight across multiple terraces. What makes this even stranger is the environment. Khuzestan experiences extreme summer temperatures that regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius. The soil contains significant salt concentrations capable of slowly destroying masonry from within. Seasonal water movement can weaken foundations over centuries. Yet the core of the ziggurat resisted complete collapse. Some researchers believe the Elamites may have developed advanced methods of waterproofing and mineral stabilization far earlier than previously assumed. Others point toward the unusually dense firing techniques of the outer bricks, which created surfaces capable of resisting erosion for centuries longer than ordinary mud brick. Similar mysteries appear at ancient Mesopotamian sites such as Ur and Babylon, but Tchogha Zanbil exists under harsher climatic conditions, making its preservation far more difficult to explain. The city's water system deepens the mystery further. Tchogha Zanbil was not built beside a massive river with naturally flowing irrigation. Maintaining a large ceremonial population in such a dry landscape required immense hydraulic planning. Excavations revealed long canals extending from the Des River toward the city, along with reservoirs and filtration systems designed to provide cleaner water. Some archaeologists believe the Elamites created sedimentation basins capable of removing impurities before water entered sacred and residential zones. If accurate, this would mean the civilization understood practical water treatment more than 3,000 years ago. The scale of this hydraulic organization is difficult to overstate. Moving reliable water supplies across kilometers of hostile terrain without modern pumps required precise gradients and long-term maintenance. Similar engineering achievements are often associated with later Persian Qanat systems or Roman aqueducts, yet Tchogha Zanbil predates many of them by centuries. In some sections, archaeologists identified evidence suggesting pressure regulation through carefully angled channels. The implication is startling. A civilization barely remembered by history may have possessed a far more sophisticated understanding of hydrology than once believed. Another unsettling aspect of Tchogha Zanbil is the enormous organizational power required to build it. Tens of millions of bricks may have been used throughout the city complex. Producing such quantities demanded labor forces, fuel supplies, transport systems, food distribution, and centralized administration operating on a massive scale. The inscriptions stamped across countless bricks suggest something close to industrial standardization. Workers repeatedly produced bricks carrying royal inscriptions, almost like a controlled state manufacturing system. Bronze Age societies are often imagined as fragmented kingdoms with limited administrative reach, yet Tchogha Zanbil hints at something far more organized. The logistics alone remain difficult to explain completely. Massive amounts of fuel would have been required to fire bricks in large kilns under desert conditions. Timber resources in the region were limited, meaning fuel either had to be transported or carefully rationed. Archaeologists continue debating how the Elamites sustained construction on this scale for years while simultaneously supporting agriculture, military obligations, and trade. Some compare the project to the centralized labor systems behind Egyptian pyramid construction. But unlike Egypt, the Elamite world remains poorly understood, leaving enormous gaps in the historical record. The city's design also feels strangely modern in its planning. Rather than chaotic expansion, Tchogha Zanbil reveals clear spatial hierarchy. Multiple concentric walls divided sacred zones from administrative and residential sectors. Access became increasingly restricted toward the center, where the ziggurat dominated the landscape. This arrangement suggests controlled ceremonial movement and perhaps political theater designed to reinforce divine authority. Ancient visitors approaching the city would have moved through layers of architecture that gradually intensified the visual power of the sacred core. Many researchers believe the city functioned less as a normal urban center and more as a ceremonial metropolis. That raises another question. Why build such an enormous sacred city in a relatively isolated location? Constructing and maintaining it required extraordinary resources, yet it never became a massive commercial capital comparable to Babylon. Some theories suggest Untashnaparisha intended the site to unify different Elamite populations through shared religion. Others argue it served as a demonstration of royal power, visible across the region. But there may have been another factor. Certain alignments within the complex hint at astronomical or ritual significance that remains poorly understood. The fall of Tchogha Zanbil only intensified its mystery. Around the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal launched devastating campaigns against Elamite territories. Historical inscriptions describe cities burned, temples destroyed, and sacred sites desecrated. Tchogha Zanbil appears to have suffered during this era before eventually being abandoned. Over centuries, the city disappeared beneath layers of dust and soil until only strange mounds remained visible across the plain. Unlike Rome or Athens, the memory of the city faded almost completely from global consciousness. This disappearance reflects a larger mystery surrounding the Elamites themselves. They existed for more than 2,000 years and interacted constantly with Mesopotamian powers, yet modern understanding of their language, religion, and political systems remains incomplete. The Elamite language does not fit neatly into the major language families surrounding it, and many inscriptions remain difficult to interpret fully. Entire sections of their belief system may be permanently lost. Tchogha Zanbil therefore stands not only as an archaeological site, but as physical evidence of a civilization history almost erased. Excavations throughout the 20th century produced discoveries that transformed understanding of the ancient Near East. Roman Gershman's teams uncovered monumental staircases, temples dedicated to multiple gods, royal palaces, underground tombs, glazed decorative bricks, and thousands of inscriptions. Archaeologists also discovered sophisticated drainage channels beneath parts of the complex, revealing that flood and rain management were considered during construction. The ziggurat itself showed evidence of multiple construction phases, suggesting modifications and reinforcements over time rather than crude expansion. One of the most important discoveries involved the city's inscriptions. Many bricks contain nearly identical cuneiform texts stating that Untashnaparisha built the sacred city for the gods. These inscriptions provided critical evidence for identifying the site and understanding its purpose. More importantly, they demonstrated the remarkable consistency of Elamite administrative systems. The repeated inscriptions imply centralized control over production at a scale rarely associated with Bronze Age Iran. Excavators also uncovered evidence of sacrificial and ritual activity around temple zones. Animal bones, offering tables, and ceremonial spaces revealed how deeply religion shaped the city's design. Some scholars believe the ziggurat functioned as a symbolic mountain connecting earth and heaven, similar to Mesopotamian sacred architecture. Yet unlike many Mesopotamian ziggurats that were repeatedly rebuilt over centuries, Tchogha Zanbil appears tied closely to the singular vision of one king. That gives the entire site an unusual sense of frozen time, as if the city represents one enormous unfinished ambition interrupted by collapse. Modern archaeological surveys continue revealing new details using satellite imaging, soil analysis, and material science. Studies of brick composition have shown surprising durability in certain fired sections, while environmental analysis suggests ancient engineers understood far more about local conditions than previously believed. Researchers are also examining how the city's canal systems interacted with seasonal water cycles, potentially reshaping ideas about early hydraulic engineering in the region. In the desert plains south of ancient Babylon, stands a shattered tower that many early travelers believed was the real Tower of Babel. Its summit is blackened as if burned by impossible heat. Its core was built from mud brick, one of the weakest building materials in the ancient world, yet the structure has survived for more than 2,000 years. This is Borsippa, one of the most mysterious ruins of Mesopotamia, and perhaps one of the clearest examples of ancient engineering that still refuses to fully explain itself. Not far from Babylon, Borsippa was once a major religious and intellectual center of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The city was dedicated to Nabu, the Mesopotamian god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. Ancient texts describe the city as a sacred place tied to learning and celestial observation. At its center stood an enormous ziggurat, known today as Bir Nimrud, a stepped tower that dominated the surrounding plains for kilometers. European explorers arriving in the 18th and 19th centuries were stunned by its appearance. Unlike many ruined Mesopotamian structures that had collapsed into low mounds, Borsippa still rose dramatically from the desert, its upper sections twisted, fractured, and darkened by fire. Some immediately connected it to the biblical story of Babel. Others believed lightning had struck the tower repeatedly across centuries. Even today, standing before the ruins creates the impression that the structure suffered a catastrophe violent enough to scar the stone itself. The greatest mystery surrounding Borsippa is not simply its size, but the fact that it still exists at all. The ziggurat was constructed primarily from sun-dried mud brick, a material highly vulnerable to water, erosion, heat stress, and structural collapse. Modern mud brick buildings in harsh climates often deteriorate within decades without constant maintenance. Yet Borsippa survived more than 2 millennia of sandstorms, seasonal flooding, extreme temperature shifts, and abandonment. Archaeologists studying the structure discovered that the Babylonians used sophisticated, layered engineering techniques inside the tower. Massive cores of mud brick were protected by outer layers of keyline-fired bricks bonded with bitumen, a natural asphalt-like substance resistant to moisture. This combination created a form of environmental shielding far more advanced than many historians once assumed possible for the period. But even this does not fully explain the tower's endurance. The internal weight distribution of the ziggurat appears unusually effective at preventing catastrophic collapse. The lower terraces absorbed pressure through step geometry that dispersed vertical force outward rather than directly downward. In several areas, drainage systems appear to have redirected water away from vulnerable sections of the core. Some engineers comparing Mesopotamian ziggurats to later ancient structures have pointed out that many civilizations using stone suffered total structural failure over time, while Borsippa's mud brick skeleton still remains visible today. That contradiction is part of what makes the site so unsettling. By conventional expectations, it should not have survived longer than massive stone monuments elsewhere in the ancient world. The darkened summit of the tower became another source of speculation. Travelers in the 19th century described the upper bricks as appearing partially vitrified, as though exposed to extremely intense heat. Some surfaces looked melted or fused together. Local legends claim the tower had been destroyed by divine fire from the heavens. Early biblical scholars used the blackened summit as evidence supporting the Tower of Babel connection. Modern archaeology proposes more grounded explanations. Repeated lightning strikes, warfare, ritual fires, or long-term thermal damage from desert exposure. Yet none fully account for the dramatic visual appearance of the upper structure. Even today, drone footage of the ruins gives the impression of a tower scorched by an event powerful enough to permanently alter the material itself. The association with Babel became even stronger because Borsippa matched several symbolic elements from later traditions. Ancient writings described a tower reaching toward the heavens, uninterrupted before completion. Nebuchadnezzar II himself left inscriptions stating that he restored the ziggurat after it had fallen into ruin. One inscription speaks of an ancient structure abandoned long before his reign, its upper sections unfinished and collapsing. That detail fascinated historians because it suggested the tower may already have carried legendary status even in antiquity. Some researchers believe stories surrounding multiple Mesopotamian ziggurats eventually merged into the biblical Babel narrative. Others argue Borsippa's dramatic appearance made it the most likely inspiration for later imagination. The archaeological history of Borsippa began attracting serious international attention during the 19th century. In the 1850s, British archaeologist Henry Rawlinson investigated the site while studying cuneiform inscriptions across Mesopotamia. Rawlinson's work helped establish that Borsippa was not merely a military ruin, but a major religious center tied directly to Babylonian intellectual life. Excavations uncovered inscriptions dedicated to Nabu, along with brick stamps bearing the name of Nebuchadnezzar II. These stamped bricks became some of the strongest evidence connecting the structure to the Neo-Babylonian Empire at its height during the 6th century BCE. The brick inscriptions revealed something else equally fascinating: standardization on an enormous scale. Millions of bricks across Mesopotamia carried nearly identical royal markings, dimensions, and manufacturing techniques. This suggested the Babylonians operated an organized state-controlled construction system capable of producing and transporting vast quantities of material across difficult terrain. Some historians compare the logistical complexity to Roman imperial infrastructure centuries later. The scale becomes even more impressive considering the environmental limitations of Mesopotamia. Large forests for timber were scarce. Stone resources were limited. Massive construction projects depended heavily on clay extraction, kiln firing, river transport, and coordinated labor systems. Borsippa was not simply a temple, it was evidence of industrial-level organization long before the industrial age existed. Excavations during the 20th century uncovered additional layers of mystery beneath the visible ruins. Archaeologists found evidence that Borsippa was deeply tied to astronomy and scholarly activity. Babylonian civilization possessed some of the most advanced astronomical knowledge of the ancient world. Priests recorded planetary movements, tracked lunar eclipses, and calculated celestial cycles with astonishing precision. Clay tablets linked to Babylonian scholarly traditions suggest temples dedicated to Nabu may have served not only religious functions, but also intellectual and observational ones. Some researchers believe the elevated terraces of the ziggurat may have functioned partly as platforms for observing the night sky above the flat Mesopotamian horizon. This possibility transformed Borsippa from a simple religious monument into something far more intriguing, a hybrid structure combining ritual, mathematics, administration, and astronomical science. The idea is reinforced by Mesopotamia's broader obsession with celestial order. Babylonian astronomers developed predictive methods capable of forecasting eclipses centuries before modern telescopes existed. Their mathematical systems influenced later Greek astronomy and eventually parts of Islamic and European scientific tradition. If Borsippa truly participated in that intellectual network, then the tower represented more than architecture. It represented a civilization attempting to decode the structure of the cosmos itself. The surrounding city also revealed evidence of advanced urban organization. Archaeologists uncovered temple complexes, canals, administrative areas, and defensive structures connected to wider Babylonian infrastructure. Water management appears to have been especially important. Maintaining a large urban center in southern Mesopotamia required constant control over irrigation, flooding, and agricultural distribution. Some canal systems linked to Borsippa may have supported both trade and long-distance transportation of construction materials. This raises another enduring mystery. How did ancient engineers maintain such massive hydraulic systems across unstable desert environments for centuries? Similar questions surround other Mesopotamian cities like Nippur, and Babylon itself, many of which eventually declined after river systems shifted or irrigation networks collapsed. Borsippa's disappearance remains another unresolved puzzle. Ancient records gradually become silent about the city after the classical period. Trade routes changed. Political power shifted. The once great intellectual centre slowly dissolved into ruin. Some historians blame environmental degradation caused by salinization and over-irrigation, which damaged agricultural productivity across Mesopotamia. Others point toward warfare, economic collapse, or the changing courses of rivers that sustained urban life. Whatever the cause, Borsippa became another example of how even highly advanced ancient systems could vanish almost completely from history. Hidden under stone floors, hot air moved through underground chambers engineered almost 2,000 years ago. Around them stood lecture halls, bath complexes, exercise courts, fountains, libraries, and ceremonial spaces built for thousands of people. Then the earthquakes came. Again and again, Western Anatolia fractured beneath the city. Entire districts collapsed across the region. Empires disappeared. Trade routes died. But parts of Sardis remained standing. That is what makes the Sardis gymnasium complex so unsettling to archaeologists. The ruins do not look primitive. They look engineered. The ancient city of Sardis stood near the Pactolus River in modern-day Turkey, at the edge of a fertile plain below Mount Tmolus. Long before Roman rule, Sardis had already become one of the wealthiest cities in the ancient world as the capital of the Lydian kingdom. Ancient writers associated the city with King Croesus, whose wealth became legendary across the Mediterranean. Sardis controlled important trade routes between the Aegean coast and the interior of Anatolia, and nearby rivers carried gold-bearing sediments that helped fuel the city's economy. By the Roman period, Sardis had transformed into a major urban centre, filled with monumental architecture, paved roads, temples, markets, and public institutions. The gymnasium complex emerged during this period of Roman prosperity, mainly during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. At first glance, the word gymnasium sounds misleadingly simple. This was not merely a place for physical exercise. In the Roman world, gymnasiums functioned as enormous civic machines. They combined education, political gatherings, bathing rituals, athletic training, and elite social life inside a single engineered environment. Sardis became one of the largest examples ever built in Asia Minor. Yet the most important question surrounding the complex is not why it was constructed. It is why it survived. Western Anatolia sits within one of the most active seismic zones in the Mediterranean world. Ancient records describe devastating earthquakes repeatedly destroying cities across the region. In 17 AD, a catastrophic earthquake leveled much of Sardis. Roman historian Tacitus described entire communities collapsing overnight. The damage was so severe that Emperor Tiberius reportedly provided massive financial assistance and exempted the city from taxes to support reconstruction. Normally, structures of this scale should have disappeared long ago. The Sardis Gymnasium did not. Modern archaeological surveys revealed something strange about the building's construction. The Romans had not relied purely on solid marble or rigid stone walls. Instead, the complex combined heavy stone exteriors with layered brick, mortar, and concrete interiors capable of distributing stress more flexibly during seismic movement. Some walls appear designed to absorb vibration instead of resisting it completely. In several areas, archaeologists found evidence that later builders repaired earthquake damage while preserving the original engineering framework rather than replacing it entirely. The result resembles an ancient form of adaptive seismic engineering. That realization changed how many researchers viewed Roman architecture in the eastern provinces. Sardis was no longer just a beautiful ruin. It became evidence that Roman builders may have understood structural resilience in earthquake-prone regions far better than previously believed. But the mysteries beneath the surface were even more impressive. During excavations, archaeologists uncovered an enormous hypocauste system hidden below the floors of the complex. Hypocaustes were ancient heating systems that circulated hot air through underground channels beneath elevated stone surfaces. Furnaces generated heat, and the hot air travelled through carefully engineered passageways below bath chambers and ceremonial rooms. In smaller Roman bathhouses, these systems were already sophisticated. At Sardis, the scale became astonishing. Entire sections of the gymnasium were climate-controlled. Hot rooms, warm chambers, steam halls, and bathing areas were all connected through a network of underground thermal engineering. Brick pillars supported raised floors while heat flowed beneath them. Hollow wall spaces carried warm air upward through the structure. Ventilation channels prevented dangerous smoke buildup. Temperatures had to remain stable enough to heat enormous marble interiors without cracking the floors above. This creates one of the most cinematic mysteries surrounding Sardis. How did ancient engineers maintain such a complex heating environment using only wood-fired furnaces, gravity airflow, and manually constructed ventilation systems? Even modern reconstructions struggle to fully explain how efficiently the heat could have circulated across such a massive structure. Some archaeologists compare the principles behind the system to primitive central heating infrastructure. Others describe it as an ancient experiment in environmental engineering. The architecture above the heating system was equally overwhelming. The reconstructed marble facade of the gymnasium rises several stories high, lined with columns, arches, niches, and decorative stonework. Massive marble blocks weighing several tons were positioned with extraordinary precision. Certain joints remained so tight that even after centuries of earthquakes and weathering, gaps between stones remain minimal. The symmetry of the facade suggests advanced planning far beyond simple monumental construction. But this creates another problem. Marble is extremely heavy. In earthquake zones, massive stone facades become dangerously unstable. Yet Sardis managed to preserve large portions of its structure for centuries while nearby buildings collapsed repeatedly. Some engineers believe the answer lies in the internal composition of the building. Behind the marble surface, the Romans used combinations of brick and mortar capable of flexing slightly under stress. Instead of creating a single rigid shell, they created layered structural systems that distributed pressure across multiple sections of the building. Similar theories have been proposed for the survival of structures such as Pantheon and parts of Pompeii. But Sardis demonstrates the idea under far more unstable geological conditions. The deeper researchers investigated the complex, the more modern its infrastructure appeared. Water channels supplied the baths continuously. Drainage systems removed wastewater through underground routes beneath the city streets. Certain sections of the gymnasium show evidence of carefully managed water pressure and controlled distribution systems. Maintaining this infrastructure would have required constant labor, fuel supply, engineering oversight, and logistical coordination. In other words, Sardis was not simply a collection of buildings. It functioned like a technological organism. This becomes even more important when considering the role of public architecture inside the Roman Empire. The gymnasium was designed not only for utility, but for psychological effect. Visitors entered enormous marble spaces filled with warm air, flowing water, polished stone, fountains, statues, and vaulted ceilings. The architecture communicated power. Rome was demonstrating that its engineering could dominate nature itself, even in a landscape repeatedly shattered by earthquakes. Excavations throughout the 20th century gradually revealed the scale of what had once existed there. The most significant investigations began through the Harvard-Cornell archaeological exploration of Sardis in the late 1950s. Archaeologists uncovered buried courtyards, fragmented columns, inscriptions, bath chambers, mosaics, marble decorations, underground heating tunnels, and collapsed architectural sections hidden beneath layers of soil and debris. One of the most difficult tasks involved reconstructing the monumental facade. Thousands of broken marble fragments had to be catalogued and matched together piece by piece. The reconstruction revealed details that transformed scholarly understanding of Roman urban architecture in Anatolia. researchers discovered that the gymnasium had undergone multiple rebuilding phases across different centuries, proving that the structure evolved continuously after earthquakes and political changes. Additional excavations around Sardis uncovered evidence of a highly connected urban environment. Roads linked the gymnasium to markets, religious centres, and residential districts. Nearby stood one of the largest ancient synagogues ever discovered outside the Levant, revealing that Sardis supported a large and influential Jewish population during the Roman period. This diversity turned Sardis into more than a Roman city. It became a crossroads of cultures, economies, and engineering traditions. Yet despite all its sophistication, Sardis eventually faded. The collapse came slowly. Trade networks weakened, political authority fractured, earthquakes continued damaging infrastructure. Over centuries, maintenance stopped, roofs collapsed, marble was removed and reused elsewhere. Dust buried the lower levels of the city. Eventually, the gymnasium became a ruin half swallowed by the landscape itself. But even abandoned, the structure refused to disappear completely. Entire civilizations disappeared from Anatolia, without leaving more than fragments of stone behind. But Stratonikeia did something almost impossible. It survived every collapse that should have erased it. Roman rule ended. Byzantine power fractured. Earthquakes tore through western Turkey for centuries. Entire trade networks vanished. Yet the city remained occupied, rebuilt, reused, and reshaped continuously for more than 2,000 years. Today, archaeologists walking through the ruins are not looking at a single lost civilization. They are looking at multiple worlds stacked on top of each other, preserved inside the same city like layers trapped beneath ice. At first glance, Stratonikeia does not look mysterious in the same way as Machu Picchu or Petra. There are no giant monoliths balancing impossibly across mountains, no hidden chambers buried beneath pyramids, no myths about vanished gods descending from the sky. The city's mystery is quieter than that, more disturbing in some ways, because the deeper archaeologists excavate the site, the more the city begins to resemble something modern long before it should have existed. A continuously adaptive urban system capable of surviving political collapse, environmental disaster, and shifting civilizations without ever fully dying. The ruins lie in southwestern Turkey, within the ancient region once known as Caria. The city was formally established during the Hellenistic Age in the 3rd century BCE and named after Stratonikeia, wife of the Seleucid ruler Antiochus I. But archaeological evidence suggests the surrounding area had already supported settlements long before the Greeks transformed it into a major city. Over time, Stratonikeia evolved into one of the most important urban centers in inland Korea. Positioned near valuable marble resources and critical trade connections linking Anatolia with the Aegean world. What makes the site extraordinary is not simply its age, but the fact that it never completely disappeared. Most ancient cities follow a predictable pattern: growth, prosperity, decline, abandonment. Nature eventually consumes the ruins. Stratonikeia broke that cycle. Instead of vanishing after catastrophe, the city repeatedly rebuilt itself directly on top of destruction. Greek structures became Roman foundations, Roman streets became Byzantine pathways. Ottoman villagers later constructed homes among ancient columns rather than abandoning the location entirely. The result is one of the most archaeologically layered cities ever discovered in Turkey. That continuity has created one of the strangest visual landscapes in ancient archaeology. In some excavation zones, Ottoman walls rise above Roman marble roads, while Byzantine remains sit underneath both. A single trench can reveal more than 1,000 years of uninterrupted adaptation. Archaeologists often describe the site less like a ruined city and more like a living historical archive, where each civilization left evidence without fully erasing the one before it. The city's marble infrastructure is perhaps the clearest example of how advanced Stratonikeia truly was. Massive paved roads still stretch across the site, their surfaces marked by ancient wagon tracks worn into stone through centuries of movement. Public squares, ceremonial gates, bath complexes, theatres, council buildings, and colonnaded streets were all constructed using enormous quantities of marble extracted from nearby quarries. The scale alone raises difficult questions. Transporting multi-ton stone blocks across uneven terrain required organisation on an industrial level. Quarrying operations had to coordinate extraction, shaping, transportation, placement, and polishing with extraordinary precision. Even more surprising is how much of that infrastructure survived repeated earthquakes in one of the Mediterranean's most unstable seismic regions. Western Anatolia sits along active fault systems that have produced destructive earthquakes for thousands of years. Ancient records mention severe tremors damaging cities throughout the region multiple times during the Roman and Byzantine eras. Stratonikeia itself suffered repeated destruction, yet large sections of the city remained structurally stable enough to be repaired instead of abandoned. This has become one of the site's most debated mysteries. Some researchers believe the city's engineers unintentionally developed construction methods that distributed seismic stress more effectively than expected for the ancient world. Others argue the techniques may have been deliberate. Certain foundations appear unusually flexible compared to rigid stone architecture found elsewhere in antiquity. In several areas, blocks were fitted so precisely that structures could shift slightly during tremors without immediately collapsing. Archaeologists also discovered evidence of extensive ancient repairs: broken columns reinforced, damaged walls thickened, collapsed sections carefully reconstructed rather than discarded. The pattern suggests something important. The inhabitants of Stratonikeia expected earthquakes to happen, and they built with survival in mind. That resilience may explain why the city endured long after neighbouring settlements faded into obscurity. One of the most astonishing discoveries at the site emerged from excavations of the city's enormous gymnasium complex. Ancient gymnasiums were not simple athletic facilities. They functioned as educational institutions, political gathering spaces, intellectual centres, and symbols of elite civic identity. But the Stratonikeia gymnasium appears unusually massive, even by Roman standards. Archaeologists uncovered expansive courtyards, monumental columned halls, exercise areas, classrooms. Ceremonial spaces and decorative marble architecture spread across an immense urban footprint. The scale does not fully match what historians once assumed about the city's regional importance. That discrepancy has fueled speculation that Stratonikeia played a larger administrative or political role within ancient Caria than surviving texts currently reveal. The city may have operated as a powerful inland centre, connecting military, economic, and intellectual networks throughout Western Anatolia. Some inscriptions discovered at the site support this theory. Marble walls preserve decrees, treaties, public announcements, legal decisions, and civic records from different historical periods, turning the city into one of Turkey's richest epigraphic sites. These inscriptions reveal another remarkable detail. Even as empires changed around Stratonikeia, the city maintained strong civic organisation across centuries of instability. Local administration adapted rather than collapsed outright. Roman authority gave way to Byzantine governance. Byzantine influence later blended into Seljuk and Ottoman systems. Yet the urban core survived through all of it. Few ancient cities demonstrate that level of continuity. Excavation teams have also uncovered sophisticated water management systems beneath the city. Drainage channels, underground conduits, fountains, reservoirs, and distribution networks reveal careful urban planning designed to manage water across difficult terrain. Some sections continued functioning in modified forms centuries after their original construction. In several areas, later civilizations reused earlier engineering systems instead of replacing them completely. That repeated reuse appears throughout the site. Ottoman builders incorporated Roman stone blocks into homes and public structures. Byzantine churches reused classical architectural elements. Ancient roads continued guiding movement patterns long after the civilizations that built them disappeared. Stratonikeia evolved organically rather than through total reconstruction. It behaved almost like a self-renewing organism. And that may be why the city feels strangely modern. Modern cities survive by adapting continuously to political change, economic pressure, environmental stress, and population shifts. Ancient cities rarely functioned that way. Most depended heavily on specific empires, rulers, or trade systems. Once those collapsed, urban life usually collapsed with them. Stratonikeia somehow escaped that fate. Deep in the mountains of ancient Caria, far from the trade ports and crowded cities of the Mediterranean, an entire stone sanctuary was built where almost no major complex should have existed. Massive terraces were forced into unstable slopes. Granite blocks weighing several tons were dragged uphill through dense mountain terrain. Sacred halls rose above narrow ridges surrounded by forests and fractured rock. And for centuries, pilgrims climbed toward this isolated place to worship a god unlike any normal Greek Zeus, a god carrying a double axe instead of lightning. Labraunda does not feel like a normal archaeological site. It feels engineered to dominate the mountain itself. Long before modern excavation began, the ruins were already known locally in southwestern Turkey. Ancient writers described the sanctuary as one of the most important religious centres in Caria, but very little was understood about its true scale. That changed in the 20th century, when Swedish archaeologist Axel W. Persson and later research teams began systematic excavations across the mountain slopes. Beneath collapsed stone, vegetation, and centuries of erosion, archaeologists uncovered something far larger than expected. Monumental stairways, banquet halls, temple structures, retaining walls, water systems, inscriptions, and evidence of carefully planned ceremonial architecture spread across multiple artificial terraces. The deeper researchers excavated, the stranger the sanctuary became. The first mystery was the location itself. Labraunda was not built beside fertile farmland, a major harbour, or an urban centre. It was built high in rough mountainous terrain nearly 700 metres above sea level. Even today, transporting heavy construction material through the area is difficult. In antiquity, it would have required enormous manpower, planning and logistical coordination. Yet the builders of Labraunda shaped the mountain as if terrain itself was not an obstacle. Huge retaining walls still hold portions of the sanctuary in place after more than 2,000 years. Some sections were constructed using hard local granite and andesite, materials significantly more difficult to cut than the limestone commonly used across much of the Mediterranean world. Several stones were positioned with surprising precision despite the irregularity of the terrain. Archaeologists studying the terraces noticed that certain walls appear engineered not only for support, but also for long-term resistance against erosion and seismic instability. That is one of the most overlooked aspects of Labraunda. Western Anatolia sits in an earthquake-prone zone. Mountains shift, slopes collapse. Water runoff slowly destroys unstable construction. Yet large parts of the sanctuary survived repeated seismic events across centuries. Some terrace systems remain intact despite the enormous weight pressing against them from above. Modern engineers examining ancient mountain architecture often focus on sites like Machu Picchu. But Labraunda presents a Mediterranean example of similarly advanced terrain adaptation. The sanctuary demonstrates that ancient builders in Korea possessed a level of geological understanding far beyond what is normally associated with smaller Anatolian kingdoms. And that raises an uncomfortable historical question. If the people of Caria could organize construction on this scale in such difficult terrain, how much knowledge about regional engineering traditions has been lost? The mystery deepens inside the sanctuary itself. One of the most important discoveries at Labraunda was a series of monumental ceremonial halls known as androns. These structures were not ordinary dining spaces. Built during the reign of the Hecatomnid dynasty in the 4th century BCE, they were designed for elite ritual feasting and political gatherings. Some scholars believe the halls functioned as controlled ceremonial environments where rulers displayed authority before selected participants. That changes the entire atmosphere of the site. Labraunda may not have been just a sanctuary for worshippers, it may have functioned as a mountain stage for political power. Its isolation actually strengthens this theory. Important religious festivals forced participants to travel uphill from the plains below, moving along a sacred road stretching roughly 14 kilometers from the city of Milissa. The journey itself would have transformed the experience psychologically. Pilgrims climbed away from ordinary urban life and into a controlled ceremonial landscape surrounded by forests, cliffs, and stone architecture. Every movement toward the sanctuary reinforced the idea that this was not normal ground. Even the god worship there was unusual. Zeus Labrandos carried the labrys, a double axe associated with older Anatolian traditions rather than classical Greek religion. The symbol appears repeatedly in carvings and inscriptions connected to the sanctuary. Unlike the familiar image of Zeus ruling from Olympus with thunderbolts, this version feels older, harsher, and more regional. Some archaeologists suspect the sanctuary existed in sacred form long before Greek cultural influence transformed the area. The mountain may originally have been tied to local Carian or Anatolian cult traditions connected to sacred springs, natural rock formations, or weather rituals. Greek architectural styles may simply represent the latest visible layer built over a much older belief system. That possibility explains why Labraunda feels culturally different from many Greek sanctuaries. It was never fully Greek. The mountain itself seems to have mattered as much as the buildings. Natural springs emerging from the slopes provided water and terrain, where reliable sources were limited. Ancient sacred sites across the Mediterranean were often connected to unusual geological features: caves, springs, mountain peaks, or acoustically powerful landscapes. Labraunda contains several of these elements simultaneously. Some researchers studying the site noted how sound travels unusually well across certain terrace areas and stairways. Ceremonial chanting, drums, or ritual processions may have echoed through the mountain sanctuary with amplified effect. While difficult to prove archaeologically, the placement of structures suggests that sensory experience may have been intentionally controlled. Movement, sound, elevation, and visibility all appear carefully organized. The architecture reinforces that impression. Monumental staircases lead visitors upward through different terrace levels, creating gradual transitions between spaces. Certain approaches restrict visibility until the final moment, revealing major structures dramatically rather than all at once. This type of spatial manipulation appears in some of the most sophisticated ceremonial complexes of the ancient world. The builders were not simply constructing temples, they were constructing psychological experience. Archaeological discoveries continued revealing new layers of complexity throughout the 20th century. Excavations uncovered inscriptions that helped historians reconstruct the political influence of the Hecatomnid rulers, particularly Mausolus and Idrius. These rulers invested heavily in monumental architecture across Korea, including the famous mausoleum at Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Labraunda appears to have been part of that broader strategy of political and ceremonial control. But unlike Halicarnassus, Labraunda remained hidden in the mountains. And because of that isolation, parts of the sanctuary survived in ways many urban ancient sites did not. Researchers uncovered carefully engineered drainage systems directing water away from sensitive structures. Channels carved into stone reduced erosion damage during storms. Reservoirs and basins controlled runoff across steep terrain. These systems may seem secondary compared to temples and monuments, but they reveal something critical. The builders understood that the mountain itself was the greatest threat to the sanctuary's survival. They were engineering against nature, and in many ways they succeeded. Some retaining walls still stand after more than 20 centuries of rain, seismic activity, and structural pressure. In several areas, the precision of the masonry remains remarkable even by modern standards. The survival of these systems suggests that ancient builders possessed generations of accumulated environmental knowledge specific to mountainous terrain. Another mystery involves the defensive features surrounding portions of the sanctuary. Archaeologists identified fortification walls and protective structures that appear unusually strong for a purely religious center. This has led to debate over whether Labraunda occasionally functioned as a secure political refuge during instability or conflict. The sanctuary's elevated position naturally provided strategic advantages. From certain points, large areas of the surrounding region become visible. Sapinuwa did not look like the center of an empire. It stood deep inside the hills of northern Anatolia, far from the great rivers of Mesopotamia, and far from the monumental stone landscapes of Egypt. Winters were harsh. The terrain was uneven. Dense forests surrounded the region for centuries. Yet sometime during the 14th century BCE, This isolated city became one of the most important command centers of the Hittite world. Kings governed from here. Priests carried out state rituals here. Thousands of official records passed through its halls. Entire military operations may have been coordinated from this mountain settlement. Then, almost without warning, it vanished. For centuries, historians knew the name Sapinuwa only from scattered Hittite texts. Ancient records described ceremonies, royal movements, diplomatic affairs, and military matters connected to the city, but no one knew where it actually was. It became one of archaeology's strangest absences, a politically important city that had disappeared so completely that even its physical location turned into a mystery. That changed in 1989, when archaeologist Aygul Suel began investigating ruins near the modern Turkish town of Ortaköy, after villagers discovered unusual clay fragments in nearby fields. Those fragments turned out to be cuneiform tablets. Beneath the soil lay the remains of a lost Hittite administrative capital. What emerged from the excavations was far larger than researchers expected. The ruins spread across multiple sectors of rugged terrain, covering several square kilometers. Massive building foundations appeared beneath collapsed earth and vegetation. Long corridors, ceremonial areas, storage spaces, workshops, and archive rooms slowly emerged from the ground. But the discovery that changed everything was the tablets. Thousands of them. More than 4,000 tablet fragments have been recovered from Sapinuwa so far, making it one of the largest Hittite textual archives ever discovered. Many were written in Hittite, while others used Hurrian and Akkadian, the diplomatic languages of the ancient Near East. This instantly revealed something historians had underestimated for decades. The Hittite Empire was operating an administrative system of enormous complexity. Long before Rome created imperial bureaucracy, long before medieval kingdoms established centralized archives, officials in Anatolia were already maintaining multilingual records connected to politics, logistics, diplomacy, religion, and warfare. Some of the most disturbing texts discovered at Sapinuwa were not military records but rituals. Entire sequences described ceremonies meant to protect the kingdom from catastrophe. Priests attempted to remove pollution from the land through animal sacrifice, symbolic purification, controlled fire, and repeated invocations of divine forces. One mistake during a ritual could supposedly anger the gods further. Certain ceremonies required exact movements, exact wording, exact timing. In the Hittite world, political stability depended on maintaining cosmic order. If famine struck or armies failed, rulers believed the balance between humanity and the gods had been broken. This gives Sapinuwa an almost unsettling atmosphere compared to many other Bronze Age sites. It was not simply a city where people lived. It functioned like a machine designed to maintain an empire, spiritually and politically at the same time. Some researchers believe royal families relocated here during periods of danger because the city served as both an administrative refuge and a religious center capable of restoring divine legitimacy during crises. That combination is rare even in ancient history. The geography of the site only deepens the mystery. Sapinuwa was built in difficult terrain surrounded by hills and seasonal extremes. Most Bronze Age civilizations flourished near stable agricultural plains or major rivers where transportation and food production were easier to control. Sapinuwa ignored that logic. It rose inside a landscape far less forgiving, yet archaeological evidence suggests the city handled large-scale administration for decades, possibly centuries. The engineering behind that survival remains one of the most interesting aspects of the site. Many structures used thick stone foundations supporting mud brick upper walls. That sounds ordinary until the climate is considered. Mud brick deteriorates quickly under harsh weather if construction methods are poor. yet sections of Sapinuwa survived more than 3,000 years. Excavations revealed sophisticated layering methods, reinforced base structures, and drainage planning that reduced erosion across unstable terrain. Some walls were several meters thick. Certain buildings appeared deliberately positioned to control runoff and protect key sectors from seasonal damage. Researchers also discovered enormous storage vessels buried within administrative areas, suggesting centralized control over food supplies and redistribution systems. This indicates the city was capable of supporting not only its population but possibly traveling officials, military personnel, and ritual specialists moving through the region. The logistical organization implied by these findings feels surprisingly advanced for the period. Then there is the fire. Large portions of Sapinuwa show signs of violent burning. Blackened layers appear across buildings and archive zones, preserving objects beneath collapsed debris. Some tablets were hardened by extreme heat, accidentally ensuring their survival for thousands of years. Without those fires, much of the written archive may have dissolved back into mud long ago. What caused the destruction remains uncertain. Some historians connect the site to the wider Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, when civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean suddenly fragmented. Major trade routes disappeared, palaces burned, populations moved, empires fell within remarkably short periods of time. Even the Hittite Empire itself vanished from history during this era. Sapinuwa may have been consumed by the same chain reaction that destroyed cities from Greece to the Levant, but evidence from the site raises difficult questions. There are signs of destruction, yet no definitive proof of a massive invasion. Some scholars argue prolonged drought weakened agricultural systems across Anatolia, destabilizing political authority before conflict erupted. Climate data from tree rings and sediment studies indicate severe environmental stress affected parts of the eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. Others believe internal political struggles inside the Hittite Empire played a major role. Rival factions, succession disputes, and regional rebellions may have fractured the kingdom before external threats arrived. Another theory suggests Sapinuwa functioned as a wartime operational center during the empire's final decades. Several texts mention royal activity connected to military campaigns, leading researchers to speculate that the city temporarily replaced or supplemented the authority of Hattusa during unstable periods. If true, this would explain why such a massive archive existed in a relatively remote location. Sapinuwa may have been where the empire tried to reorganize itself while the ancient world around it was collapsing. That possibility changes the emotional weight of the site completely. These ruins may not represent an ordinary city destroyed by history. They may represent an empire attempting to survive its final crisis. Excavations over the past decades have continued revealing evidence of highly organized state activity. Archaeologists uncovered seal impressions used to secure official documents and storage containers, proving administrative control was tightly regulated. Pottery workshops suggest local industrial production supported large institutional systems. Religious objects connected to Hittite storm gods and ceremonial traditions point toward elite ritual activity taking place inside the city. Every excavation season expands the image of Sapinuwa from a forgotten settlement into something far more significant, a hidden nerve center of Bronze Age power. The site also changed modern understanding of the Hittites themselves. For much of modern history, popular culture treated the Hittites as secondary players overshadowed by Egypt, Babylon, or Assyria. Sapinuwa challenged that idea completely. The city demonstrated that the Hittites managed multilingual diplomacy, centralized archives, advanced logistics, religious bureaucracy, and large territorial administration at a level comparable to the greatest powers of the ancient Near East. The basalt monolith of Daulatabad does not merely sit upon the Deccan Plateau, it commands it with a silent, brooding authority that has chilled the hearts of invaders for nearly a millennium. To look upon its vertical soot-coloured walls is to witness a masterpiece of medieval paranoia, a structure where every stone was laid and every tunnel hewn with the singular intent of systematic slaughter. While the world celebrates the aesthetics of the Taj Mahal or the grandeur of the Red Fort, Daulatabad remains an outlier, a dark, functional titan that served as the ultimate laboratory for military architecture and psychological warfare. Rising abruptly to a height of 200 meters, the citadel of Devagiri, later renamed Daulatabad, is a geological anomaly reshaped by the hands of thousands of nameless masons. It is a place where the line between natural mountain and man-made fortress has been blurred into a singular, impenetrable entity. This is not a castle built of mortar and brick. It is a mountain sculpted into a weapon. The location of the fortress was chosen with a predator's instinct. Situated in the modern-day Aurangabad district of Maharashtra, it sat at the strategic crossroads of North and South India. For the Yadava dynasty, who founded it in the 12th century, the site offered a natural defensive advantage that required only a final, brutal refinement to become invincible. When the first Muslim conquerors from the north, led by Alauddin Khalji, arrived at its base, they did not see a target. They saw an impossibility. What truly elevates Daulatabad into the realm of ancient mystery is a feature hidden deep within the rock, the Andhari. Known as the Dark Passage, this is perhaps the most sophisticated and terrifying defensive mechanism ever discovered in the medieval world. To ascend to the upper reaches of the citadel, an invading army was funneled into a subterranean labyrinth carved directly into the basalt heart of the mountain. Here, the architecture itself becomes the executioner. As soldiers entered the tunnel, they were plunged into a darkness so absolute that sensory deprivation became their first enemy. The passage was designed with a series of lethal glitches. Stone steps were carved with uneven heights to cause soldiers to stumble in the dark. The air within the tunnel was manipulated through a series of ingenious vents. If an enemy force managed to push through, defenders would close heavy iron shutters and ignite massive fires at the tunnel's base. The vents were designed to create a chimney effect, drawing toxic smoke and the searing heat of burning chili peppers directly into the lungs of the trapped invaders. Archaeologists exploring the Andhari have uncovered even more sinister details. The passage contains several false exits. In the frantic chaos of a dark, smoke-filled tunnel, a soldier might see a glimmer of light and rush toward it, only to find that the opening was a trapdoor leading directly into a 50-foot drop into the crocodile-infested moat below. The Andhari was not designed to stop an army. It was designed to digest one. The mystery of Daulatabad extends beyond its lethal corridors and into the realm of historical madness. In 1327, the Sultan of Delhi, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, made a decision that remains one of the greatest enigmas of Indian history. Obsessed with the fort's invulnerability, he ordered the entire population of Delhi, the imperial capital, to migrate 700 miles south to Daulatabad. Modern archaeological surveys of the lower city ruins have revealed the harrowing scale of this forced exodus. Excavations have unearthed vast residential quarters that were occupied for only a few years before being abandoned, alongside countless graves of those who perished during the brutal march across the subcontinent. The city of fortune became a city of ghosts. Why Tughlaq would bankrupt his empire and sacrifice his people to inhabit this lonely rock remains a subject of intense debate. Was it a visionary attempt to unify India, or the catastrophic whim of a ruler who trusted stone more than people? The engineering required to isolate the citadel is equally baffling. Surrounding the base of the mountain is a massive moat, 50 feet deep and equally wide, bridgeable only by a single narrow gallery that could be retracted or destroyed. What stuns modern engineers is the smoothness of the rock faces. The builders utilized a technique known as fire setting, heating the basalt with massive bonfires before dousing it with cold water to shatter the stone. But the precision they achieved suggests a profound understanding of geological stress points. The resulting walls are so slick and vertical that they were described by contemporary travelers as being impossible for even a cobra to climb. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the Archaeological Survey of India has worked to peel back the layers of this multi-dynastic site. One of the most significant discoveries occurred near the summit, where researchers mapped a complex hydraulic network. In a region prone to drought, the fort possessed hidden stone cisterns and terracotta piping that could store enough rainwater to sustain a garrison of thousands for over a year. This discovery shifted our understanding of medieval siege warfare. Daulatabad was not just a shield, but a self-sustaining ecosystem that could outlast any enemy. The significance of Daulatabad in the global archaeological record is its testament to the limits of human ingenuity when fueled by the fear of conquest. It stands as a monument to a time when architecture was the ultimate deterrent. It was never taken by force. Every time the fort changed hands, it was through the slow rot of starvation or the quiet exchange of gold for keys. Perched upon the jagged spine of the Apennine Mountains, a skeletal crown of limestone defies both time and gravity. This is Rocca Calascio, the highest fortress in Italy, and perhaps the most haunting sentinel of the medieval world. To the casual observer, it is a ruin of breathtaking beauty. But to the historian and the seeker of anomalies, it remains a profound architectural enigma. It is a silent witness to a history that feels less like recorded fact and more like a fever dream of the Middle Ages, a place where the boundary between the terrestrial and the celestial becomes dangerously thin. Located within the rugged embrace of the Gran Sasso e Monti della Laga National Park, Rocca Calascio sits at a staggering elevation of 1,460 meters above sea level. To reach this limestone titan, one must navigate the harsh, windswept terrain of the Abruzzo region, a landscape where the air grows thin and the silence is absolute. For centuries, this structure served as a strategic military observation point, offering an unobstructed 360-degree view of the Tirreno Valley and the Novelli Plain. Unlike the lowland castles of the Renaissance designed for courtly luxury or administrative ease, the Rocca was a creature of pure utility and survival. It was not discovered in the traditional sense of a hidden tomb, but rather re-emerged in the modern consciousness, as researchers realized that this fortress in the clouds was a masterpiece of medieval strategic engineering, designed to oversee a world that was as dangerous as it was vast. The most striking mystery of Rocca Calascio lies in its flawless military record, which is defined by a haunting absence of conflict. Throughout the turbulent centuries of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, when the Italian peninsula was a chaotic chessboard of warring city-states and invading empires, Rocca Calascio was never taken by force. It stands as a virgin fortress, an impossible bastion that no army dared to siege. The mystery isn't merely why it was avoided, but how it was physically manifested at such a height without the aid of modern machinery. Archaeologists have long puzzled over the logistics of transporting massive limestone blocks up these sheer, treacherous cliffs. The precision with which the 4 cylindrical towers are integrated into the living rock suggests a level of architectural sophistication that borders on the obsessive. It was designed to be invincible, and in the realm of human warfare, it achieved that impossible standard. Yet, the supreme irony remains that the only force capable of bringing Rocca Calascio to its knees was not the hand of man or the engine of war, but the violent shifting of the earth itself during the devastating earthquake of 1703. Surrounding this stone giant are secondary enigmas that deepen the narrative and hint at a complex social structure hidden from the history books. Just below the fortress sits the Church of Santa Maria della Pieta, a structure that presents its own set of questions. Built in the late 16th century, its octagonal design is a radical departure from the traditional cross-shaped churches found throughout Italy. The octagon is a shape steeped in esoteric symbolism, often representing the bridge between the finite world of man and the infinite realm of the divine. Why build such a sophisticated, geometrically perfect temple in a location so remote and windswept? While local lore suggests it was a votive offering after a miraculous victory over brigands, the mathematical precision of its alignment with the fortress suggests a deeper, perhaps more celestial purpose. Furthermore, the fortress was part of a sophisticated optical telegraph system. Researchers have found evidence that the watchmen of Calascio could communicate with other distant towers using mirrors by day and fire by night, allowing information to travel across the Italian peninsula at speeds that would have seemed supernatural to the uninitiated. Archaeological interest in the site intensified in the late 20th century, particularly during the restoration efforts of the 1980s, led by regional heritage authorities and independent medievalists. These excavations sought to peel back the layers of dust and myth to find the reality of life at the edge of the world. What they found was a complex system of rainwater cisterns, an essential survival mechanism for a fortress with no natural springs. The recovery of ceramic shards, metal arrowheads, and remnants of daily life confirmed that the Rocca was not just a cold lookout, but a self-sustaining ecosystem capable of withstanding long, frozen isolations. The significance of these findings lies in the realization that Rocca Calascio was the ultimate expression of human resilience against the elements. It represents a period where the boundary between the wild and the civilized was drawn in stone. For the historians who study it, the site serves as a bridge to a forgotten Italy, a place where the mountains were both a sanctuary and a prison. Today, as the mist rolls over its white towers and the wind howls through its vacant arches, Rocca Calascio remains a testament to an era of architecture meant to inspire awe and fear in equal measure. It was built to intimidate, designed to endure, and destined to become a ghost. It stands not as a monument to a specific victory or a single king, but as a silent observer of the passage of eons, reminding us that even the most invincible structures must eventually surrender to the earth from which they rose. It is a place of shadows and stones, where the past is never truly dead, but merely waiting for the wind to tell its story once more. Stone walls still rise from the dry plains of western Anatolia, but nothing about the landscape makes sense anymore. The city was built for the sea. Its wealth came from ships, naval movement, merchants, and access to the Aegean world. Yet today, the coastline sits far away from the ruins, as if the ocean itself abandoned the settlement centuries ago. What remains is Notion, a forgotten Ionian city once feared, consulted, and politically influential enough to shape decisions far beyond its borders. Ancient rulers travelled here to hear prophecies from the sanctuary of Apollo. Armies waited for divine approval before marching into war. And for a time, this city stood at the centre of one of the most powerful networks in the Eastern Greek world. Then it vanished slowly beneath mud, shifting geography and historical silence. Unlike famous archaeological sites that were frozen by sudden catastrophe, Notion disappeared gradually. No volcanic eruption preserved its streets. No dramatic destruction sealed its buildings beneath ash. Instead, the city faded piece by piece across centuries until even ancient historians barely described it. That disappearance is what makes the site so unsettling. Entire civilizations relied on cities like this to control trade, religion, and military movement. Losing one should have left a massive scar in history, but Notion became almost invisible. The ruins stand near the modern Turkish coast, not far from the ancient centres of Ephesus and Miletus. Archaeologists believe the city emerged during the archaic Greek period and later became deeply connected to the Ionian League, a powerful alliance of Greek cities along the Anatolian coast. Early travellers documented scattered ruins in the 18th and 19th centuries, but systematic excavations revealed something much larger than expected. Beneath layers of soil and collapsed stone lay evidence of a city planned with remarkable precision. The streets of Notion were not chaotic pathways formed naturally over generations. They followed organised lines, intersecting in deliberate geometric patterns. Residential districts appear arranged according to coordinated planning principles, rarely associated with smaller Greek settlements. Public buildings were integrated into carefully structured civic zones. This level of organisation suggests centralised authority, engineering knowledge, and long-term urban control. That alone would not be unusual for a Roman city, but much of Notion's planning predates Roman domination of the region. Historians still debate how sophisticated urban planning became so standardized in parts of the Greek world centuries earlier than many people imagine. Maintaining such order in a coastal environment would have required continuous management. Flooding, erosion, and unstable soil constantly threatened ancient settlements along the Anatolian coast. Yet Notion remained active for generations. Some researchers compare the city's organization to Priene, another highly structured Ionian settlement famous for its grid system. But Notion differs in one critical way. Priene is remembered. Notion was nearly erased. The city's greatest source of power was not military strength or architecture, it was information disguised as prophecy. At the heart of Notion stood a sanctuary dedicated to Apollo. Ancient texts mention an oracle operating there, one respected enough to influence regional politics and military campaigns. In the Greek world, oracles were not merely spiritual institutions, they functioned as centers of authority. Kings and generals often refused to act without divine consultation. A prophecy could delay wars, redirect armies, or legitimize rulers. The most famous oracle in Greece stood at Delphi, but Notion occupied a different kind of position. Delphi sat closer to the symbolic heart of mainland Greek civilization. Notion existed on a frontier between competing worlds: Greek city-states, Anatolian kingdoms, Persian expansion, and later Hellenistic empires. Information from every direction passed through its harbour. This has led some historians to a fascinating theory. The priests of Apollo may not have relied solely on mysticism. Temples received merchants, sailors, diplomats, and military envoys long before news reached ordinary populations. In a world without newspapers or telecommunications, sanctuaries became intelligence centers. Priests could gather information from incoming ships, recognize political patterns, and transform educated predictions into divine prophecy. If true, the Oracle of Notion may have operated as one of the ancient world's earliest geopolitical observatories. Excavations around the sanctuary uncovered architectural fragments, inscriptions, and sacred spaces connected to Apollo's cult, but much of the complex has been destroyed or buried. Earthquakes damaged sections of the city repeatedly across antiquity. Later civilizations dismantled older buildings to reuse the stone. Time erased details faster than archaeologists could recover them. That incomplete evidence creates another layer of mystery. No one fully understands how the rituals worked inside the sanctuary. Unlike Delphi, where literary descriptions survived in greater detail, Notion exists mostly through fragments. Historians are reconstructing an entire religious system from broken inscriptions and scattered ruins. The inscriptions themselves became one of the site's most important discoveries. Archaeologists uncovered decrees, political records, military agreements, and dedications carved into stone. These texts transformed the understanding of Ionian politics. Ancient Greek cities are often imagined as isolated communities constantly trapped in warfare, but the records from Notion reveal something more complex: a network of alliances, negotiations, diplomatic obligations, and coordinated strategy. Religion and politics were deeply connected. Sanctuaries were not separate from state power. Priests held influence because belief held influence. Controlling an oracle meant controlling decisions. But perhaps the strangest mystery surrounding Notion is the sea itself. When the city flourished, ships could approach its harbour directly from the Aegean. Maritime access shaped its economy, military role, and political relevance. Today, the sea lies far from the ruins. The transformation happened slowly over centuries as sediment carried by regional river systems altered the coastline. Harbours across western Anatolia began filling with mud. Water channels narrowed. Coastal trade routes shifted. For ancient cities, this was catastrophic. Geological studies suggest that the coastline near Notion changed dramatically during antiquity. Areas that once functioned as ports became marshland and eventually dry terrain. Warehouses lost purpose. Naval movement declined. Economic influence weakened. A city built around maritime access slowly became disconnected from the sea that sustained it. Nature accomplished what invading armies could not. The same environmental process damaged nearby centres like Ephesus and Miletus, but Notion appears especially vulnerable because so much of its identity depended on regional connectivity. Once trade declined, the city lost more than wealth. It lost strategic importance. Yet Notion did not collapse instantly. Archaeological layers show continuous occupation across multiple eras. Greek foundations were modified during the Hellenistic period. Roman influence introduced new architectural styles and infrastructure. Byzantine communities later reused older structures for defensive and religious purposes. Entire buildings were dismantled and rebuilt using stones from earlier monuments. The city became an architectural palimpsest, one civilization writing directly over another. This constant rebuilding creates enormous problems for archaeologists today. Much of the original archaic Greek city has disappeared beneath later construction phases. Researchers often uncover Roman walls built from stones taken out of older temples. Sacred areas became residential districts. Public structures changed function repeatedly. Every empire reshaped the city according to its own needs. Modern excavations continue revealing new sections of the settlement. Archaeologists recovered ceramics imported from distant Mediterranean regions, proving that Notion participated in long-distance trade networks. Coins discovered at the site indicate economic autonomy and local authority. Some carry symbols associated with Apollo, reinforcing the central role of the sanctuary within civic identity. Fortification walls uncovered during excavations also suggest that the city expected conflict. Notion occupied a dangerous position between competing powers. Persian expansion into Anatolia threatened Greek autonomy during the 5th century BCE. Later, Alexander the Great's campaigns transformed the political order again. Roman domination eventually absorbed the region into imperial administration. Through all these transitions, Notion survived by adapting. But survival came at a cost. Every period erased part of what came before. Unlike Pompeii, where archaeologists can reconstruct daily life from preserved streets and buildings, Notion offers only fragments. Organic materials vanished long ago. Wooden structures decayed. Decorative surfaces collapsed. Large portions of the city remain buried beneath layers of sediment deposited over centuries. Archaeologists are trying to reconstruct an entire civilization from disconnected pieces scattered across time. And maybe that fragmentation is what makes the city feel so modern. Notion was not destroyed in a single dramatic moment. It declined through environmental change, economic isolation, political transformation, and gradual abandonment. The process mirrors the way many real civilizations disappear, slowly enough that people living through it may not even realize collapse has already begun. The Dniester River winds through the rugged landscapes of western Ukraine like a silver serpent, guarding the secrets of empires that have long since crumbled into the dust of history. At a sharp bend in this ancient waterway stands a titan of stone, a structure that appears less like a military fortification and more like a gateway between worlds. This is Khotyn Fortress. For centuries, it has served as the silent sentinel of the steppe. A colossal limestone monolith that has witnessed the clash of civilizations from the Kievan Rus to the Ottoman Empire. Yet, beyond its strategic importance, Khotyn holds a deeper, more esoteric mystery. Etched into its towering walls are crimson symbols that defy conventional historical explanation, suggesting that this fortress was built not just to repel men, but to ward off the very forces of darkness. The location of Khotyn is a geographical paradox that has long puzzled archaeologists and military historians alike. Unlike the majority of medieval European fortifications, which were perched atop inaccessible crags or high mountain ridges to dominate the horizon, Khotyn was constructed within a natural basin, tucked away beneath the surrounding hills. This placement seemingly surrendered the high ground to any potential invader, a decision that contradicts centuries of military doctrine. Excavations at the site have revealed that this choice was deliberate. Beneath the 15th century stone foundations lie the charred remnants of a 10th century wooden stronghold, proving that for over 1,000 years, the specific coordinates on the Dniester have been considered sacred or essential. It was only during the reign of Prince Alexander the Good, and later Stephen the Great of Moldavia, that the fortress achieved its current awe-inspiring scale. With walls reaching 40 meters into the sky and 6 meters in thickness, creating a vertical labyrinth of stone that seems to grow directly from the riverbank. The most profound enigma of Khotyn, the feature that draws historians and mystics alike, is the presence of the Crimson Runes. High upon the northern facade of the fortress, woven directly into the masonry with red, burnt brick, is a series of massive geometric patterns. These are not the random marks of masons or decorative flourishes. They're intentional, large-scale symbols that dominate the visual landscape of the fortress. One pattern resembles a massive pitcher or a chalice, leading some to speculate it represents the Holy Grail, while others take the form of intricate interlocking crosses and endless knots. The technical execution of these symbols is a feat of ancient engineering that remains unexplained. To place these patterns so precisely at such a height would have required a level of architectural planning and scaffolding that was nearly unheard of in the 15th century. Because they face the direction from which the nomadic and Ottoman threats originated, many researchers believe these runes functioned as a form of spiritual armor, a metaphysical barrier designed to protect the Christian East from the perceived heathen armies of the South and West. The mysteries of the exterior are mirrored by the anomalies found within the fortress's very substance. On one specific section of the towering northern wall, a massive dark, damp spot persists, seemingly permanent regardless of the weather. Even during the most blistering summer droughts, when the rest of the limestone is bone-dry and pale, this weeping section remains saturated. This phenomenon has given rise to one of the most chilling archaeological theories regarding the site. The legend of the immurement. In ancient Eastern European folklore, it was believed that a structure of great importance required a living sacrifice to ensure its permanence. The Weeping Stone is whispered to be the location where a young woman was buried alive within the walls to serve as the fortress's eternal guardian. While modern scientists suggest the stain might be caused by a hidden capillary system within the rock or an ancient forgotten cistern deep inside the masonry, the lack of blueprints for the internal structure means the truth remains entombed within the stone. The subterranean world of Khotyn offers a different kind of discovery, one that speaks to the desperation and ingenuity of those who lived within its shadows. Archaeologists have mapped a sprawling network of tunnels and vaulted chambers that descend deep into the earth, far below the water level of the Dniester. These are not merely storage cellars. They are architecturally sophisticated spaces with ventilation shafts and hidden escape routes that once led to the riverbank. During excavations in the mid-20th century, researchers discovered that these tunnels were used to store vast quantities of gunpowder and provisions, but they also found evidence of secret ritual chambers. These spaces, hidden away from the prying eyes of the garrison, suggest that the ruling elite of the Moldavian court practiced a blend of Orthodox Christianity and older, more hermetic traditions. The artifacts recovered from these depths, bronze amulets, shattered Byzantine glass, and strange, unmarked lead seals, hint at a life of occult study conducted amidst the constant threat of siege. The true significance of Khotyn was brought to light by the extensive archaeological campaigns led by scholars such as Ion Vinokurs, whose work in the latter half of the 20th century transformed the fortress from a romantic ruin into a documented historical treasure. These excavations provided the first concrete evidence of the site's multi-layered history, revealing that Khotyn was a liminal city, a place existing on the threshold between the Slavic, Latin and Turkic worlds. The earth surrendered a startling diversity of finds: Ottoman smoking pipes, Polish silver coins, Hungarian weaponry, and even silk fragments from the Far East. Each layer of soil told a story of a different occupation, a different language, and a different god. The discovery of the 65-meter deep well in the center of the courtyard provided a time capsule of military life. At its bottom, archaeologists found everything from discarded armor to the remains of animals, providing a visceral look at the conditions during the legendary siege of 1621, when the fate of Europe hung in the balance on these very ramparts. Khotyn remains an unfinished manuscript, a story where the ink has been replaced by stone and blood. The significance of these archaeological findings goes beyond mere dates and names. They reveal a world where the physical and the spiritual were inextricably linked. The fortress was not just a shield of rock, it was a psychological statement, a monument built to project power into the hearts of enemies and to house the secret anxieties of its masters. The crimson runes still glow under the setting sun, their true meaning lost to the passage of time, serving as a reminder that history is not just a collection of facts, but a series of echoes from a past that was much more complex and much more mysterious than we dare to imagine. As long as the weeping stone continues to bleed and the symbols remain undeciphered, Khotyn will stand as the ultimate enigma of the Dniester, a testament to the enduring power of ancient mystery. Perched beside a limestone cliff in Western Ireland, surrounded by one of the harshest landscapes in Europe, the ancient stone fort of Cahercommaun still stands after more than 1,000 years. Built in the rocky wilderness of the Burren sometime between the 8th and 9th centuries CE, the fortress appears almost impossible. Massive stone walls weighing thousands of tons were constructed directly beside a steep drop of over 30 meters, in a region fractured by unstable karst limestone. Even modern engineers would approach such terrain cautiously. Yet the builders of Cahercommaun created a structure so durable that large sections remain standing despite centuries of Atlantic storms, erosion, and temperature shifts. For decades, archaeologists classified Cahercommaun as a simple Irish ring fort, but as excavations continued, the site began revealing details far more complex than expected. Beneath the surface of the stone walls was evidence of advanced engineering, unusual astronomical alignments, and signs of a social hierarchy far wealthier and more sophisticated than historians once believed possible for early medieval Ireland. The fortress was first systematically studied in the 1930s by Harvard archaeologists who carried out major excavations across the site. Their discoveries immediately raised new questions. Instead of a crude defensive enclosure, they uncovered a carefully planned multi-wall fortification system. Cahercommaun was constructed with 3 concentric stone ramparts stretching across the only accessible side of the cliff, while the sheer rock face itself formed a natural defensive barrier behind it. This reduced the need for additional walls and demonstrated a highly strategic understanding of terrain optimization. Each excavation season uncovered something new. Archaeologists found iron-working evidence, animal remains, imported objects, and traces of high-status occupation. The discoveries suggested that Cahercommaun was not an isolated farming settlement but a center of regional importance. Some researchers even proposed that it may have functioned as a political or ceremonial stronghold rather than merely a defensive refuge. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Cahercommaun is the engineering of its dry stone walls. The structure was built entirely without mortar. Thousands of limestone blocks were stacked with extraordinary precision, relying only on balance, weight distribution, and friction to remain stable. In several sections, the walls reached nearly 5 meters thick. Some individual stones weigh several hundred kilograms. This construction method resembles other ancient dry stone engineering traditions found across the world. The polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru and the Bronze Age fortifications of Mycenae use similar principles of interlocking stone geometry to resist earthquakes and long-term structural stress. Yet Cahercommaun was built in an isolated Irish limestone region with no evidence of advanced machinery, cranes, or mortar technology. How its builders achieved such structural precision using only basic tools remains unresolved. The geological setting makes the feat even more extraordinary. The Burren is a karst landscape formed from fractured, carboniferous limestone over 320 million years old. The ground is uneven, cracked, and highly unstable in places. Modern geological surveys show that karst terrain is particularly vulnerable to subsidence and water erosion. Constructing a heavy stone fortress near a cliff edge in such conditions would require a deep, practical understanding of load distribution and foundation stability. Some sections of Cahercommaun's walls also lean slightly inward, a technique known as battered wall construction. This subtle inward angle helps structures resist collapse by redirecting gravitational forces toward the base. The same principle appeared in several ancient civilizations, including Hittite fortifications in Anatolia and Inca stone architecture in the Andes. The presence of such design logic in early medieval Ireland raises difficult questions about the practical engineering knowledge possessed by its builders. Another major mystery involves the alignment of the fort itself. Researchers studying the site noticed that the main entrance and internal layout do not appear random. Certain openings align with distant limestone ridges and points along the horizon where the sun rises during key seasonal transitions. Although the evidence remains debated, some archaeologists believe Cahercommaun may have incorporated astronomical observations into its design. Ireland already possesses some of the most sophisticated prehistoric astronomical monuments ever discovered. The Passage Tomb of Newgrange, built around 3200 BCE, famously aligns with the winter solstice sunrise, so precisely that sunlight illuminates its inner chamber for only a few minutes each year. Similar alignments exist at sites such as Lough Crew Cairns and Carrowkeel. Because of this tradition, some scholars suspect that fragments of ancient astronomical knowledge survived in Ireland far longer than previously assumed. The question is whether Cahercommaun was simply a military fort or something more complex. From inside the structure, visibility across the Burren landscape is remarkably controlled. Certain vantage points frame specific ridges and pathways while obscuring others. This may have had defensive value, but it also suggests deliberate spatial planning. Some theories propose that the fort served ritual purposes tied to seasonal cycles, elite gatherings, or territorial symbolism. The scale of the site creates another puzzle. Cahercommaun encloses an area of more than 1 hectare, large enough to shelter families, livestock, and storage facilities. Yet the surrounding Burren landscape is notoriously difficult for agriculture. Thin soils, exposed rock, and harsh Atlantic weather make large-scale farming challenging even today. Why would a community invest enormous labor into constructing a massive stone complex in such an unforgiving environment? One possible explanation lies in trade and regional control. The Burren occupies a strategic position near routes connecting inland Ireland to Atlantic coastal zones. Archaeological evidence suggests long-distance exchange networks existed in Western Ireland during the early medieval period. Imported objects found at Cahercommaun indicate access to resources beyond the immediate region. This has led some historians to argue that the fort belonged to a powerful elite, controlling movement, trade, and political influence across the area. Excavations also revealed evidence of specialized activities uncommon for ordinary settlements. Iron slag and metalworking traces indicate on-site production or repair of tools and weapons. Animal bone analysis suggests selective consumption patterns associated with higher status communities. Some remains belong to younger cattle, which were economically valuable and usually reserved for feasting or elite use. These findings support the idea that Cahercommaun was occupied by a wealthy and influential social class. Yet despite all these discoveries, enormous gaps remain in understanding the site. No written records describe its construction. No surviving Irish manuscripts explain the engineering techniques used. Archaeologists still debate how long the fort was occupied, whether it functioned continuously or if it served ceremonial purposes during certain periods of the year. Even the durability of the structure itself remains astonishing. Dry stone architecture is highly vulnerable to moisture penetration and freeze-thaw cycles. Western Ireland experiences constant humidity, salt-laden winds, and heavy rainfall exceeding 1,000 millimeters annually in some areas. Under such conditions, poorly balanced walls should gradually collapse. Yet many sections of Cahercommaun survived for over a millennium. Modern structural engineers studying dry stone systems note that the fortress displays unusually efficient weight distribution and stone placement compared to many contemporary European structures. There are also signs that the visible ruins may represent only part of a much larger complex. Erosion around the cliff edge may have destroyed terraces, outer pathways, or secondary structures over centuries. Some researchers believe additional features once extended farther along the limestone plateau before natural collapse erased them from the landscape. Do you think Cahercommaun was simply a fortress? Or could it have been part of a much larger ceremonial and astronomical system lost to history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Deep within the windswept silt of the northeastern Nile Delta lies a ghost of the ancient world. A city that served as the capital of kings, yet vanished so completely it was thought to be a mere myth for millennia. While the Great Pyramids of Giza capture the world's imagination with their geometric perfection, Tanis holds secrets that are far more haunting and visceral. It is a place where granite giants lie shattered in the mud, and where the traditional solar radiance of Egyptian gold was eclipsed by something far more precious and spiritually unsettling: the cold, ethereal shimmer of ancient silver. The story of Tanis is not just a tale of fallen stone, but a narrative of a lost capital that once dictated the fate of the Mediterranean. For centuries, this metropolis was the gateway to the east, a strategic powerhouse and the seat of the 21st and 22nd dynasties. Yet, as the Plusiac branch of the Nile choked with silt and shifted its course, the city was slowly strangled. By the Roman era, the once great metropolis had become a graveyard of broken obelisks. Eventually swallowed by the rising water table and the salt marshes of the delta, the world forgot Tanis existed until 1939, when the French archaeologist Pierre Montet arrived at the site. While the drums of World War II were beating across Europe, Montet was on the verge of a discovery that should have rivaled the finding of Tutankhamun's tomb. However, because his revelations were published as the world descended into total war, his work remained buried in the shadow of global conflict. He didn't just find a city, he uncovered a royal necropolis hidden within the temple precinct, the only place in Egypt where multiple pharaohs were found in their original, undisturbed resting places, protected by the very mud that had hidden them from tomb robbers. The most profound enigma of Tanis is not found in the scale of its ruins, but in the specific choice of metal used to honor its dead. When Montet breached the burial chamber of Pharaoh Susensthirst, he encountered a sight that defied everything previously understood about Egyptian funerary rites. In a land where gold was traditionally considered the flesh of the gods, Susens was encased in a magnificent solid silver anthropoid sarcophagus. This was a radical departure from the norm. In ancient Egypt, silver was known as hedge, and because the nation had no natural silver deposits, it had to be imported through arduous and dangerous trade routes from the Near East or the Mediterranean. During the Third Intermediate Period, silver was exponentially more valuable and rarer than gold. To be buried in a solid silver coffin was a display of wealth and resourcefulness that exceeded even the boy king Tutankhamun. The mystery deepens when examining the craftsmanship. The silver coffin is a masterpiece of metallurgy, shaped with such precision that it suggests a level of stability in Tanis that historians previously thought impossible for this era of supposed decline. The question remains, why did these kings choose the lunar glow of silver over the solar radiance of gold? Some scholars suggest a theological shift toward the moon god Khonsu, while others believe it was a stark demonstration of their absolute control over the world's rarest trade commodities. Beyond the silver, Tanis presents a baffling architectural paradox that has long frustrated Egyptologists. As Montet excavated the Great Temple of Amun, he found massive statues, columns and obelisks bearing the cartouche of Ramesses the Great, a pharaoh who lived and died more than 2 centuries before Tanis ever became a capital. For decades, this led to massive historical confusion, with some early explorers wondering if Ramesses II had built the city himself. The truth eventually revealed a feat of ancient engineering that borders on the impossible. The kings of Tanis did not quarry new stone for their capital. Instead, they literally dismantled the former capital of Pi-Ramesses and transported thousands of tons of granite statues and 200-ton obelisks across the delta to rebuild them in Tanis. It was a recycled city, a grand architectural illusion of power where the past was physically uprooted and replanted to legitimize a new line of kings. This massive relocation of heavy stone across marshland remains one of the most underrated logistical achievements of the ancient world, proving that even in a time of political fragmentation, the Egyptians possessed the technical genius to move mountains. The aura of mystery surrounding Tanis is further amplified by its place in modern mythology and biblical history. Pop culture, most notably the cinematic masterpiece Raiders of the Lost Ark, positioned Tanis as the final resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. According to the legend, the pharaoh Shishak brought the Ark to Tanis after he plundered the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, while direct archaeological evidence of the Ark remains elusive. The connection to Shishak is grounded in historical reality. Pharaoh Shoshenq I, the biblical Shishak, reigned from this very city. In the ruins, archaeologists have found evidence of the immense wealth he brought back from his campaigns in the Levant. The mystery lies in what else might be hidden in the unexcavated sectors of the city. If the treasures of Solomon were indeed brought here, they may still lie deep beneath the thick saline mud, a terrain so difficult and corrosive that only an estimated 10% of the city has been properly uncovered. The legacy of Pierre Montet's work at Tanis remains one of the most significant yet overlooked chapters in the history of archaeology. He recovered masks of pure gold, intricate lapis lazuli jewellery, and the silver sarcophagi that gave these rulers the title of the Silver Pharaohs. These finds proved that the so-called Dark Ages of Egypt were actually a period of incredible sophistication and international influence. Today, Tanis remains a haunting and evocative sight. Unlike the polished tourist tracks of Luxor or the Giza Plateau, it is a chaotic field of tumbled giants and half-submerged walls. It stands as a silent, powerful reminder that even the most formidable empires can be erased by a shifting river, leaving only the cold, mysterious glint of silver to tell the story of a forgotten age of kings. The city of Tanis continues to challenge our understanding of Egyptian history, forcing us to look past the gold of the sun and into the silver shadows of the delta. A Roman ceremonial city with heated halls, marble temples, and massive public squares once stood in the middle of one of the most dangerous frontiers of the ancient world. It was burned, rebuilt, expanded, and buried for centuries beneath the plains of Hungary. Today, the ruins of Gorsium reveal a mystery that still unsettles archaeologists. Why did Rome spend enormous resources constructing an imperial-style city in a region constantly threatened by invasion and collapse? Gorsium was located in the Roman province of Pannonia, near the Danube frontier, where the empire faced continual pressure from tribes beyond its borders. Most settlements in this region were built for survival. They were practical military towns designed around forts, supply routes, and defensive structures. But Gorsium was different. Excavations uncovered evidence of monumental architecture usually associated with major Roman centres far closer to Italy itself. Archaeologists found enormous ceremonial spaces, temples connected to emperor worship, paved roads laid out in geometric grids, complex drainage systems, and traces of luxurious public buildings that once dominated the landscape. For centuries, the city disappeared almost completely. The ruins remained buried beneath farmland until large-scale excavations during the 20th century began exposing the true size of the settlement. Hungarian archaeologists, including teams associated with the Zentistvan Kirali Museum, uncovered layer after layer of Roman construction hidden beneath the soil. What emerged was not a forgotten village, but a carefully planned city that appeared far too ambitious for such a dangerous frontier zone. The greatest mystery surrounding Gorsium is the scale of Rome's investment in the city. Historians believe it became an important ceremonial centre during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, particularly for gatherings linked to the imperial cult. In many parts of the empire, emperor worship was used as a political tool to reinforce loyalty to Rome. But the level of monumental construction at Gorsium seems unusually excessive for a provincial frontier settlement. Large public plazas, temple complexes, and administrative buildings suggest that the city was designed to impress, intimidate, and symbolize Roman authority at the edge of the empire. That symbolism may explain why Rome repeatedly rebuilt the city after destruction. Archaeological evidence shows that Gorsium suffered major devastation during the Marcomannic Wars in the 2nd century AD, when Germanic tribes pushed violently against Roman territory. Excavators uncovered burn layers, collapsed walls, and signs of widespread fire damage across several districts of the city. Yet instead of abandoning the site, Rome reconstructed it with even more monumental architecture. This decision still raises difficult questions. Rebuilding a city of this scale required enormous resources. Stone, marble, skilled labor, and engineering materials had to be transported across vast distances into a region already facing military instability. From a purely strategic perspective, the investment makes little sense. But if Gorsium functioned as a symbolic center of Roman identity in Pannonia, abandoning it may have been politically unacceptable. The city itself had become part of Rome's message of permanence and control. One of the most remarkable discoveries at the site was the advanced infrastructure hidden beneath the ruins. Archaeologists uncovered carefully engineered drainage systems designed to handle the harsh climate of Central Europe. Roads were built using layered stone foundations capable of resisting freeze-thaw cycles that normally destroy ancient construction over time. In several areas, researchers found evidence that Roman engineers deliberately adapted Mediterranean building techniques to survive colder northern conditions. The city also contained hypocaust systems, one of the most advanced technologies of the Roman world. Hypocaust functioned by circulating hot air beneath floors and through hollow walls, effectively creating central heating nearly 2,000 years ago. These systems were expensive and technically sophisticated, usually found in bathhouses or elite buildings in major Roman cities. Discovering them in a frontier settlement shocked many researchers. Gorsium was not simply a military outpost. Rome was attempting to recreate urban Roman civilization itself at the edge of hostile territory. Fragments of imported pottery, statues, inscriptions, and coins discovered during excavations reveal how connected the city remained to the wider empire. Luxury goods arrived from distant regions, while inscriptions dedicated to emperors suggest the city played an important political and religious role. Several findings point toward gatherings involving provincial elites and Roman officials, reinforcing the theory that Gorsium may have served as one of the ceremonial centers of Roman Pannonia. The architecture itself reveals another layer of mystery. Some public spaces appear far larger than necessary for the local population. Researchers believe these plazas and ceremonial districts may have been designed for major provincial assemblies, military ceremonies, or imperial rituals intended to project Roman authority across the frontier. In many ways, Gorsium looks less like a normal city and more like a carefully staged display of imperial power. This idea becomes even more fascinating when compared to other Roman frontier settlements. Sites along the Danube frontier usually emphasized military defense above all else. Gorsium, however, invested heavily in symbolism, urban planning, and monumental aesthetics. Rome was building more than infrastructure. It was constructing psychological dominance. Archaeologists also discovered multiple construction phases beneath the city, showing that different generations repeatedly rebuilt and expanded the settlement over time. Some older foundations were buried beneath later structures, while traces of destroyed buildings remained trapped beneath reconstructed districts. These layers reveal centuries of destruction and renewal. almost as though the empire refused to allow the city to disappear. And eventually it vanished anyway. After the decline of Roman authority in the region, Gorsium slowly fell into abandonment. Buildings collapsed, roads disappeared beneath soil and vegetation. Stone blocks were likely removed for later construction elsewhere. Over centuries, even the memory of the city faded. By the modern era, few people realized that a major Roman ceremonial center lay hidden beneath the Hungarian plains. The Senegambian stone circles stretch across the savanna landscapes of modern-day Senegal and the Gambia as one of the least understood megalithic engineering systems on Earth. More than 1,000 stone circles and nearly 30,000 carved monoliths extend across over 100 kilometers of West African terrain. No surviving written language explains who designed them, and no surviving blueprint reveals how they were organized. Yet the precision of their geometry, the scale of their construction, and the engineering hidden beneath the soil suggest a civilization far more sophisticated than historians once believed. The modern world only began to understand the scale of the site during colonial-era surveys in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Early explorers initially assumed the stones were random tribal monuments or simple burial markers, but systematic excavations later revealed something far more complex. Archaeologists uncovered carefully planned circular formations, deep burial chambers, iron artifacts, trade goods, and evidence of long-term construction phases spanning more than 1,000 years. Radiocarbon dating eventually placed much of the construction between the 3rd century BCE and the 16th century CE, making the system contemporaneous with powerful medieval kingdoms across Africa and Europe. What immediately separates the Senegambian circles from many other ancient monuments is scale. The site contains over 17,000 individual stones in documented zones alone. Some monoliths stand more than 2.5 meters tall and weigh up to 10 tons. Most were carved from laterite, an iron-rich stone that becomes extremely hard after exposure to air. Modern geologists note that laterite is difficult to shape consistently without strong cutting tools because its density changes as it oxidizes, yet thousands of these stones display remarkably similar cylindrical forms. This raises one of the oldest mysteries surrounding the site. How were these stones quarried and shaped with such consistency? Unlike Egypt or Rome, there is no evidence of large-scale surviving machinery, advanced pulley systems, or extensive metal workshops associated with the circles. Iron tools existed in West Africa during this period, but archaeologists still debate whether the available metallurgy was sufficient to mass-produce monoliths with this degree of uniformity. Some stones show flattened surfaces and symmetrical shaping that appear intentional rather than naturally fractured. Even more puzzling, several quarries identified near the site are located kilometers away from the final construction zones. Transporting stones weighing multiple tons across unstable seasonal terrain would have required enormous coordination. During the rainy season, much of the region becomes muddy and difficult to traverse. Without paved roads or evidence of wheeled transport systems on a large scale, researchers believe labor crews may have relied on sledges, wooden rollers, or compacted earthen pathways. But no direct physical evidence survives to fully confirm the methods used. But the greatest mystery may lie not in the stones themselves, but in their geometry. Across multiple sites including Wasu, Senegambian, and Wana, the circles display astonishing dimensional consistency. Many measure between 4 and 6 meters in diameter with nearly equal spacing between individual monoliths. In some formations, deviations between stone intervals are minimal, despite the monuments being built centuries apart. Archaeologists were stunned by how standardized many of these circles appeared. Such consistency suggests the builders used repeatable measuring systems rather than visual estimation alone. Some researchers propose that the engineers may have employed central stake and rope techniques similar to methods believed to have been used at Stonehenge. By anchoring a fixed pivot point and rotating a measured cord around it, ancient builders could theoretically produce near-perfect circles over large construction areas. Yet the precision seen at Senegambia goes beyond rough ceremonial geometry. Several circles maintain highly balanced spatial proportions even after partial collapse. In some cases, the orientation of entrance stones appears deliberately aligned relative to neighboring formations. Statistical studies conducted on certain clusters suggest the placements are unlikely to be entirely random. This has led some researchers to question whether the builders possessed a more advanced geometric tradition than previously assumed for the region. What makes this especially controversial is the absence of surviving educational infrastructure. No mathematical tablets, no engineering diagrams, and no carved measurement scales have ever been discovered. And yet, the circles repeatedly demonstrate evidence of organized planning. Comparisons with other megalithic cultures only deepen the mystery. At Stonehenge, researchers found evidence of astronomical alignments tied to the solstices. In ancient Egypt, geometric planning was linked to centralized state bureaucracy and written mathematics. But in Senegambia, the engineering appears disconnected from the kinds of administrative systems historians normally associate with monumental architecture. There are no giant palaces nearby, no massive urban ruins, and no royal inscriptions claiming ownership. Instead, the circles seem to emerge from a decentralized culture capable of organizing labor across generations, without leaving behind the bureaucratic fingerprints normally expected from large engineering projects. Even more mysterious is how the stones were erected. Many monoliths remain almost perfectly vertical despite centuries of erosion, flooding, and shifting ground pressure. Excavations revealed that some stones were buried deep underground at carefully calculated depths that helped stabilize their center of gravity. Engineers studying the foundations found that several circles used surprisingly effective weight distribution techniques. The deeper foundation pits prevented tilting even in water-saturated soil conditions. For a civilization with no surviving mathematical texts, the structural understanding demonstrated here is extraordinary. Some of the strangest stones add another layer of uncertainty. At several sites, archaeologists discovered rare bifurcated stones shaped almost like the letter Y. These monoliths are extremely unusual within African megalithic traditions. Unlike ordinary standing stones, they appear intentionally sculpted into branching forms. Their function remains unknown. Some theories suggest they served as symbolic markers tied to elite burials or ritual status, while others speculate they may have represented cosmological ideas or clan identities. But manufacturing such shapes from brittle laterite would have required careful control during carving. A single mistake could fracture the entire stone. The fact that multiple examples survive suggests the builders possessed specialized stoneworking knowledge that has since disappeared. Beneath many circles, archaeologists uncovered complex burial systems containing iron weapons, copper ornaments, ceramics, and glass beads imported through trans-Saharan trade routes. Chemical analysis of certain beads indicates links to North Africa and possibly the Middle East. This suggests the civilization responsible for the circles was not isolated, but connected to larger economic networks spanning thousands of kilometers. And yet, despite evidence of trade sophistication, the society itself remains strangely invisible in the archaeological record. No confirmed capital city has been identified, no surviving chronicles describe the builders directly, and no clear ethnic continuity has been definitively established. It is as if the engineering survived longer than the identity of the people who created it. Some researchers also suspect the circles may contain astronomical significance. Certain formations appear oriented towards seasonal solar positions associated with rainfall cycles critical for agriculture. In a region heavily dependent on predictable monsoon timing, even basic solar observation could have carried enormous practical value. However, unlike the clearer solar alignments documented at Stonehenge or Newgrange, the astronomical evidence in Senegambia remains disputed. Critics argue many alignments may simply result from pattern recognition imposed by modern observers. Still, the repeated directional similarities between multiple circles continue to fuel debate. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Senegambian circles is not what archaeologists have discovered, but what they have not. To quarry tens of thousands of stones, to transport them across difficult terrain, to standardize their geometry, to organize labor over centuries, and to preserve structural stability in tropical conditions, all without leaving behind a conventional historical record, suggests the existence of a sophisticated organizational system that history barely remembers. What do you think these mysterious stone circles were truly built for? Were they purely ceremonial burial sites, or evidence of a lost engineering tradition far more advanced than historians realize? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Along the coastal mountains of western Syria, between dense valleys and the winds coming from the Mediterranean Sea, stands one of the least discussed yet most technically mysterious ancient complexes in the Levant, Hosn Suleiman. Unlike Petra, Palmyra, or Baalbek, Hosn Suleiman rarely appears in mainstream documentaries, yet the site contains engineering features that continue to puzzle archaeologists, structural engineers, and historians alike. Massive stone platforms still stand on unstable mountainous terrain. Precision-cut masonry survives in an earthquake zone. Drainage systems continue to function after nearly 2,000 years, and beneath the visible ruins may lie entire underground sections that modern excavation has barely touched. The first modern documentation of the site began during surveys conducted in the 19th century under Ottoman-era exploration campaigns. At first, researchers believed the ruins were simply remnants of a regional Roman sanctuary dedicated to local deities. But each new excavation complicated that theory. Archaeologists uncovered massive retaining walls far larger than necessary for a simple mountain temple. They found unusually thick foundations buried beneath later Roman additions. Then came the discovery of strange underground chambers carved directly into bedrock, suggesting the complex may once have served purposes far beyond religion. One of the earliest mysteries emerged from the location itself. Hosn Suleiman was built at an elevation where transporting construction material would have been extraordinarily difficult. Some limestone blocks used in the platform and lower walls weigh several tons each. Even today, moving stones of that size through steep mountain terrain would require cranes, engineered roads, and hydraulic systems. Yet ancient builders somehow achieved this nearly 2,000 years ago using only primitive transport technology. The puzzle becomes even stranger when compared to other mountain complexes of the ancient world. At Machu Picchu in Peru, Inca engineers used carefully cut stones fitted together without mortar to survive earthquakes. At Hosn Suleiman, researchers discovered a surprisingly similar concept. Several wall sections appear designed with slight movement tolerance between blocks. Instead of rigidly locking every stone into place, the builders may have intentionally allowed microscopic shifts during seismic activity. Modern earthquake-resistant structures sometimes use flexible base isolation systems based on the same principle. This is especially important because Western Syria sits near active tectonic fault systems connected to the Dead Sea Transform Fault Zone. Historical records describe multiple devastating earthquakes striking the region over the last 2 millennia. Entire cities collapsed. Temples were destroyed. Yet parts of Hosn Suleiman remain standing with remarkable stability. Structural engineers studying the ruins noted that some foundation stones were laid in layered arrangements capable of dispersing vibration rather than concentrating stress at single points. Whether this was intentional or discovered through generations of experimentation remains unknown. Then came the mystery of the stone cutting itself. Several surviving blocks display edges so straight that sunlight still reflects evenly across their surfaces despite centuries of erosion. Tool marks found on some stones suggest repeated abrasion methods rather than simple hammer carving. Researchers believe the builders may have used advanced abrasive cutting techniques involving quartz sand, water, and metal saws or cords. Similar methods were later used by Roman engineers, but some features at Hosn Suleiman may predate the full spread of Roman stoneworking technology in the region. One particularly controversial detail involves right-angle cuts found deep inside narrow structural sections, where workers would have had very limited space to maneuver tools. Reproducing such cuts experimentally using reconstructed ancient equipment proved extremely difficult. Some experimental archaeologists concluded that achieving that level of geometric consistency would require not only skilled labor, but also sophisticated measurement systems capable of maintaining alignment across large stone surfaces. Excavations during the 20th century uncovered another unexpected feature: an elaborate hydraulic management system hidden beneath the visible sanctuary. Small channels carved directly into bedrock controlled rainwater flow across the steep mountain slopes. Their angles were incredibly precise. In some sections, gradients measured only a few degrees, just enough to guide water safely away without eroding the foundations. Modern hydrological studies show that poorly managed runoff is one of the primary causes of ancient mountain structures collapsing over time. Yet Hosn Suleiman's drainage system still functions partially even after centuries of neglect. The sophistication of this water engineering has raised major questions. Roman hydraulic systems are famous for their aqueducts and urban drainage, but Hosn Suleiman demonstrates advanced water control in a remote mountain environment where such precision should have been far more difficult to implement. Some researchers now suspect that local Phoenician or pre-Roman builders possessed a much deeper understanding of terrain hydrology than historians previously believed. As excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered evidence suggesting the complex may not have been purely religious. Thick defensive walls surround parts of the sanctuary. Elevated observation positions provide wide views across surrounding valleys. Certain interior chambers are unusually enclosed and poorly ventilated for ceremonial gatherings. These details led to theories that Hosn Suleiman may have served multiple functions simultaneously: sanctuary, fortress, storage center, and possibly even a protected archive or treasury. The underground sections remain among the greatest mysteries. Ground resonance tests conducted in limited areas produced hollow acoustic responses beneath several floor sections. This suggests the presence of unexcavated chambers or tunnels still sealed beneath the ruins. Similar discoveries at other ancient sites often revealed hidden storage rooms, ritual chambers, or escape passages. But because of political instability and limited archaeological access in Syria over recent decades, large-scale subsurface scanning technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and full 3D mapping have never been comprehensively deployed at the site. That absence of modern surveying technology is significant. At sites like the Egyptian pyramids, scanning projects recently discovered hidden voids previously unknown for thousands of years. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, underground tunnels completely changed understanding of the city's ritual structure. Researchers suspect Hosn Suleiman could contain equally transformative discoveries if extensive imaging were ever conducted. Another mystery lies in the architecture itself. The complex displays a blend of cultural influences that do not fit neatly into a single civilization. Some columns resemble Greco-Roman proportions. Certain foundation techniques appear closer to Phoenician coastal engineering traditions. Meanwhile, geometric layouts in several sections resemble Anatolian ceremonial structures found hundreds of kilometers away. This has led historians to speculate that Hosn Suleiman may have been constructed over multiple eras by different groups sharing engineering knowledge across the eastern Mediterranean. The question becomes even more intriguing when considering trade and cultural exchange during antiquity. The Phoenicians were among the greatest maritime navigators of the ancient world, establishing networks stretching from the Levant to North Africa and Spain. If engineering concepts move through those networks alongside goods and religion, sites like Hosn Suleiman may preserve evidence of technological collaboration long before formal empires unified the region. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding Hosn Suleiman is not what has been discovered, but how little of it has been fully studied. Unlike globally famous archaeological sites flooded with international funding and advanced scans, Hosn Suleiman remains relatively isolated from modern archaeological attention. Entire underground sectors may still lie untouched. Structural systems that resisted earthquakes for centuries remain poorly understood. Stoneworking methods visible in the ruins continue to challenge assumptions about regional technology levels during antiquity. Do you think Hosn Suleiman was simply a forgotten sanctuary, or could it be hiding knowledge and engineering techniques far beyond what we currently understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The dust of the Potahar Plateau holds a secret that refuses to stay buried. A silent chronicle written in stone and soil that challenges everything we know about the collision of East and West. At first glance, Bhir Mound appears to be little more than a sprawling ruin of jagged walls and narrow alleys. But to those who know how to read the earth, it represents the very heartbeat of ancient Taxila. This is not merely a site of archaeological interest. It is a profound testament to the endurance of human civilization, a place where the shadows of Persian kings, the ambition of Alexander the Great, and the wisdom of Marian emperors are stacked one upon the other in a vertical timeline of survival and conquest. The story of Bhir Mound began to emerge from the haze of history in the early 20th century under the meticulous gaze of Sir John Marshall. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought golden treasures, Marshall was obsessed with the architecture of time itself. Between 1913 and 1934, he peeled back the layers of this high ground, revealing a settlement that had served as the gateway to the Indian subcontinent for centuries. Located near the strategic junction of the Royal Highway and the trade routes of Central Asia, Bhir Mound was the original Taxila, a city that thrived long before the more orderly, grid-like cities of the later eras were even conceived. It was a place born of necessity, growing organically like a living organism, absorbing the cultures of those who sought to possess it. The most hauntingly beautiful aspect of Bhir Mound is its stratigraphic record, a phenomenon that acts as a physical book of history where each chapter is buried beneath the next. Archaeologists identified 4 distinct layers of occupation, spanning from the 6th century BCE to the 2nd century BCE. The deepest layer whispers of the Achaemenid Persians, an era when the city was a satrapy of a vast empire stretching to the Mediterranean. As you move upward, the soil changes, marking the tumultuous arrival of the Greeks. The 3rd layer reveals the zenith of the Mauryan Empire, a time when the legendary Ashoka governed this territory, turning it into a center of learning that rivaled Athens. The final uppermost layer captures the city's twilight before its inhabitants migrated to the new capital of Sirkap. This vertical accumulation is the ultimate archaeological mystery, forcing us to ask how a city could sustain such intense continuity through the rise and fall of 4 distinct world powers. Walking through the excavated streets of Bhir Mound today is an exercise in navigating a labyrinth of ancient secrets. The layout is famously chaotic, characterized by winding streets and irregular house plans that defy the rigid geometry of modern urban planning. Yet, hidden within this apparent disorder is a marvel of ancient engineering that continues to baffle researchers. long before the great cities of Europe developed modern sanitation. The people of Bhir Mound had perfected a sophisticated system of soak wells. These were deep vertical shafts lined with terracotta rings, designed to filter waste and rainwater directly into the earth. It was a masterpiece of hydraulic design that allowed a densely populated, disorganized city to remain hygienic and functional for hundreds of years. The sophistication of this invisible infrastructure suggests a society that prioritized collective well-being and environmental management far beyond what their primitive stone walls might suggest. Beyond the architecture lies a darker, more intimate mystery found in the hoards of Bhir Mound. During the excavations, Marshall's team discovered numerous earthen vessels buried beneath the floors of private residences, filled with thousands of silver coins, exquisite jewelry, and polished gems. These were not the ritual offerings of a temple, but the desperate insurance policies of ordinary citizens. The dating of these hoards coincides remarkably with the arrival of Alexander the Great in 326 BCE. They tell a silent story of terror, of families who heard the rumbling of Macedonian phalanxes on the horizon and buried their life's savings in the dirt, hoping to return once the storm had passed. The fact that these treasures remained buried for 2,000 years is a heartbreaking confirmation that for many, that return never happened. The legacy of Bhir Mound is perhaps best understood through the artifacts that bridge the gap between warring worlds. Sir John Marshall uncovered jewellery that defied easy classification, blending the delicate filigree of Greek craftsmanship with the bold symbolism of Persian and Indian art. These objects prove that Bhir Mound was more than a fortress or a trade post. It was a cosmopolitan melting pot where ideas were exchanged as freely as gold. It was here that Greek philosophers are said to have met Indian gymnosophists, engaging in debates that would forever influence the intellectual trajectories of both continents. The significance of Marshall's work was not just in the stones he unearthed, but in proving that globalism is not a modern invention, but an ancient reality that flourished in the dust of Pakistan. Today, Bhir Mound stands as a silent witness to the transience of power. The great kings who once walked these alleys are gone, their names etched into coins that were forgotten in the mud. Yet, the city remains, a complex puzzle of human ambition and ingenuity. It serves as a reminder that history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous flow, where one civilization builds upon the ruins of another, using the same stones to tell a different story. In the quiet desolation of the mound, the air still feels heavy with the presence of those who lived, feared, and dreamt within its labyrinth, leaving behind a legacy that continues to challenge our understanding of the ancient world. In the flat countryside of North Yorkshire, England, 3 enormous prehistoric circles stretch across the land in almost perfect alignment. Known as Thornborough Henges, the site covers more than 1 mile and dates back nearly 5,000 years. From the air, the formation looks less like primitive earthworks and more like a planned geometric system carved into the landscape with impossible precision. Even more disturbing, some researchers believe the spacing of the circles mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt, a pattern that should have been impossible for Neolithic farmers, with only stone tools and no written mathematics. Unlike Stonehenge, Thornborough was not discovered in a dramatic excavation. The earthworks had always existed, but for centuries they were mistaken for ordinary landscape features. It was only through aerial photography in the 20th century and later geophysical surveys that archaeologists realized the true scale of the complex. Modern LiDAR scans revealed that the 3 henges were deliberately aligned along a northwest-southeast axis across nearly 1.6 kilometers. Each enclosure measures roughly 240 meters in diameter, making them among the largest henges ever built in Britain. Together, the circles form one of the largest ritual landscapes in prehistoric Europe. The most controversial theory surrounding Thornborough is the possibility that the 3 henges were designed to imitate Orion's belt. Researchers noticed that the spacing and slight offset between the northern, central, and southern henges resemble the positions of the stars Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The comparison immediately drew attention because a similar theory had already been proposed for the pyramids of Giza necropolis. But Thornborough creates an even stranger problem. The site predates many later astronomical monuments and was built not from stone blocks but from enormous quantities of earth. To create the layout, Neolithic builders would have needed to measure long distances across uneven terrain while preserving proportional spacing with remarkable accuracy. The challenge becomes even more severe when considering the scale. Each henge is separated by roughly equal intervals, and the entire complex extends over an area larger than many ancient cities. Without aerial perspective, written geometry, or metal surveying instruments, maintaining such alignment would have been extraordinarily difficult. Some archaeologists dismiss the Orion theory as coincidence, yet the slight deviation between the circles closely resembles the offset seen in Orion's belt itself. If the arrangement was intentional, it suggests that Neolithic Britain possessed a level of observational astronomy far beyond conventional expectations. The implications are enormous. Orion was associated with death, rebirth, and divine power in several later civilizations, including ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Thornborough raises the uncomfortable possibility that prehistoric societies separated by thousands of kilometers may have shared symbolic astronomical traditions long before recorded history. The sheer engineering scale of Thornborough remains deeply difficult to explain. Each henge originally consisted of a massive circular ditch surrounded by high earthen banks. Archaeologists estimate that tens of thousands of tons of soil were excavated and moved during construction. Experimental archaeology suggests that digging even a small section of ditch using antler picks and stone tools requires enormous labor and time. Yet the Thornborough builders created 3 gigantic enclosures with relatively smooth curves and consistent dimensions. The northern henge alone measures approximately 250 meters across. By comparison, the inner diameter of Stonehenge is only around 33 meters. Thornborough was operating on an entirely different scale. Even more puzzling is the lack of evidence for a centralized ruling system. There are no palaces, no written records, and no signs of military infrastructure. Somehow, a Neolithic farming society organized enough manpower to reshape an entire landscape for purposes that appear almost entirely ceremonial. Some researchers estimate that construction may have required coordinated labor from hundreds or even thousands of people over multiple generations. That raises difficult questions about how workers were fed, who directed the measurements, how technical knowledge was preserved for decades, and why such immense effort was devoted to monuments with no practical defensive function. Excavations uncovered traces of gypsum around parts of the henges, suggesting the banks may once have been covered in bright white material. If true, Thornborough would have looked radically different in antiquity. Instead of dark earthworks blending into the countryside, the circles may have shone white beneath the moonlight, visible from enormous distances across the Yorkshire Plain. Some archaeologists compare the visual effect to giant lunar beacons. This detail becomes especially significant when combined with possible astronomical alignments. The reflective gypsum could indicate that the site was designed specifically for nighttime rituals connected to lunar cycles or celestial observation. The engineering implications are extraordinary. Large quantities of gypsum would have needed to be quarried, transported, processed, and distributed across huge surfaces without wheeled vehicles or advanced infrastructure. No one knows exactly how this was accomplished. Several studies suggest Thornborough may align not only with Orion but also with the 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle. This is one of the most complex astronomical cycles visible to the naked eye. During a major lunar standstill, the moon reaches its most extreme rising and setting positions on the horizon. Tracking this cycle requires observations carried out consistently across decades. Some pathways and entrances at Thornborough appear oriented toward these extreme lunar positions. If the theory is correct, the site was not merely symbolic. It functioned as a gigantic observational landscape capable of recording predictable celestial movements over generations. That possibility changes how historians view Neolithic Britain. Instead of isolated farming communities with limited scientific understanding, Thornborough suggests organized knowledge systems capable of preserving astronomical data across centuries. Modern surveys show that Thornborough was never an isolated monument. The surrounding area contains burial mounds, ritual avenues, pits, ancient pathways, and evidence of structures connected to the nearby river Ure. Archaeologists increasingly believe the henges form the center of an enormous ceremonial landscape used for seasonal gatherings and religious activity. In many ways, Thornborough resembles a prehistoric ritual complex on a scale comparable to later sacred capitals. Some experts describe it as a Neolithic cathedral district. The comparison is striking because the site predates the pyramids of Egypt's Old Kingdom by centuries. While ancient Egypt was still developing early dynastic states, communities in Britain were already constructing massive, geometrically planned ceremonial landscapes. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Thornborough was built, but why. The site had no obvious military value. It controlled no major trade route. It offered little strategic defense. Every sign points towards symbolic, religious, or astronomical importance. That alone challenges many assumptions about prehistoric societies. What do you think Thornborough Henges was truly built for a sacred ritual site, an ancient astronomical observatory, or something we still completely fail to understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The shoreline of the Gulf of Corinth holds a secret so dark and absolute that for 2 millennia it was dismissed as a ghost story told to frighten sailors. In a single winter night in 373 BCE, Helike, the glittering capital of the Achaean League and the prestigious centre of Poseidon's worship, did not just fall, it vanished. It was not burned by invaders or slowly abandoned to time, it was consumed. The earth liquefied, the sea rose in a towering wall of black water, and by dawn, where a metropolis of thousands once stood, there was only a silent, shimmering lagoon. This is the story of the real Atlantis, a city buried so deep in the mud of history that it took 2,000 years for the world to find its pulse again. For centuries, the location of Helike was the ultimate obsession of maritime archaeology. Ancient chroniclers like Pausanias and Strabo spoke of a submerged city where the masts of sunken ships entangled in the branches of underwater groves, and where a colossal bronze statue of Poseidon stood guard beneath the waves, still clutching his trident. Inspired by these accounts, modern explorers spent the 20th century dragging sonars across the seafloor of the Gulf of Corinth, expecting to find a Greek Pompeii resting in the deep blue. They found nothing. The abyss remained silent, and many began to believe that Helike had been eroded into nothingness by the relentless tides, leaving behind only the whispers of poets and the dust of legends. The breakthrough did not come from the sea, but from the earth itself. In 1988, Greek archaeologist Dora Katsonopoulou and American physicist Stephen Sota launched the Helike project. Shifting their gaze away from the open water, they hypothesized that the ancient coastline had moved significantly over 2 millennia. Using boreholes and magnetometry, they pierced the soil of the surrounding inland plains, underneath peaceful vineyards and olive orchards that stretched toward the mountains. In 2001, deep beneath the silt of the delta, they struck ancient stone. Helike had not stayed in the sea. The sea had brought the earth to bury it. They found the city not under the waves, but trapped in a subterranean prison of clay and sand, preserved in a prehistoric tomb that had been camouflaged by centuries of sediment. The most extraordinary mystery of Helike lies in its chilling status as the primary blueprint for Plato's Atlantis. While scholars have searched for Atlantis from the Azores to Antarctica, the timeline of Helike's destruction is too perfect to be a coincidence. Plato was a young man in Athens when Helike was obliterated. the news of a wealthy, powerful city being dragged into the abyss as a supposed punishment for hubris would have been the breaking news of the 4th century BCE. The specific details, an earthquake followed by a sudden flood, the total disappearance of a civilization in one day and one night, mirror Plato's Timaeus and Critias with haunting precision. Helike is the tangible, terrifying reality that turned a philosopher's allegory into a global legend, providing the physical evidence that a lost continent could indeed be a memory of a lost city. Beyond the Atlantis connection, Helike is shrouded in the legend of the wrath of the Earthshaker. The city was the headquarters of the Pan-Ionian cult of Poseidon, a place where the god of the sea was honoured above all others. Ancient texts claim that shortly before the disaster, the citizens of Helike had murdered Ionian suppliants who sought to copy the city's sacred laws. To the ancient mind, the earthquake wasn't a tectonic event, it was a divine execution. This supernatural timing is supported by eerie biological reports from the time. For 5 days before the ground broke, every snake, weasel and centipede in the city reportedly fled toward the mountains in a mass exodus. The mystery remains. Did the animals sense the shifting electromagnetic fields of the fault line, or was the city truly marked for extinction by a power beyond human understanding? The archaeological yields from the Helike project have been nothing short of transformative, offering a glimpse into a society frozen at the height of its power. Under Katsanopoulou's direction, the team unearthed a wealth of artifacts that provide a frame of classical Greek life that is rarely seen in such an undisturbed state. They discovered silver coins bearing the stern face of Poseidon and the distinct trident symbol, the very currency that once powered the Achaean economy and dominated regional trade. Excavations revealed massive industrial complexes, including specialized dye works for the famous Murex purple cloth and sophisticated pottery kilns that suggest a high level of economic specialization and wealth. More importantly, they found the remains of the Hellenistic Stoa, a grand walkway that suggests the city was an architectural marvel of its time, designed to reflect the glory of the gods it served. Perhaps the most significant discovery was the early Bronze Age settlement found beneath the classical layers. This reveals that the site had a cycle of destruction. 1,000 years before the 373 BCE event, an earlier civilization at the same spot had also been leveled by water. This suggests that Helike was a city built on a cursed or geologically volatile foundation, destined to be reclaimed by the elements time and time again. The significance of these finds extends beyond the artifacts themselves. They validate the accuracy of ancient oral traditions and historical texts that modern science had long ignored. It proves that within the myths of the past lie the hard truths of our geological history, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The recovery of Helike is more than just a find of coins and walls, it is a profound lesson in geological humility and the persistence of human memory. It proves that the lost cities of our myths are often just waiting for the right technology to look in the wrong places. Today, as researchers continue to peel back the layers of mud and time, Helike stands as a warning from the deep, that even the most powerful civilizations are merely guests on a restless earth, and that some legends are built on very real foundations of stone and salt. The city remains a haunting monument to the vulnerability of man, a place where the boundary between history and myth was washed away in a single night of terror. Torre de los Escipiones rises beside an ancient Roman road near the Mediterranean coast of Spain, weathered by salt wind, rain, and almost 2,000 years of exposure. Yet the two giant stone figures carved into its surface are still staring outward with details that should have disappeared centuries ago. Archaeologists still debate how the monument survived this long in a coastal environment that destroys stone far faster than this. Even stranger, nobody is completely certain who the figures represent, who was buried inside the tower, or whether it was truly a tomb at all. The monument stands just outside the ancient Roman city of Tarraco, modern Tarragona, once one of the most important capitals of Roman Hispania. It was built beside the Via Augusta, the great imperial road stretching across the Iberian Peninsula. Thousands of travelers, merchants, soldiers, and officials would have passed it constantly. Unlike hidden ruins buried in deserts or jungles, Torre de los Escipiones was designed to be seen. The structure was first documented in detail during the 18th and 19th centuries as scholars began studying Roman remains across Spain. Early historians believed the carved figures represented the famous Scipio brothers, Roman generals linked to the conquest of Hispania during the Punic Wars. That interpretation gave the monument its modern name. But modern archaeology later revealed something unsettling. The identification was almost certainly wrong. The greatest mystery surrounding the tower is not its identity, but its survival. The structure is built from local limestone and sandstone materials that normally erode aggressively in marine climates. Mediterranean coastal air carries salt particles that penetrate porous rock. Over centuries, those salts crystallize within the stone, causing fractures, surface scaling, and gradual collapse. Many Roman ruins across the region suffered catastrophic erosion. Decorative carvings in coastal environments often lose definition within a few centuries. Yet the two towering relief figures on Torre de los Escipiones remain visible after nearly 2 millennia. Their outlines are still recognizable. Folds of clothing remain partially intact. Facial structures, though damaged, can still be studied. This has led researchers into an uncomfortable technical question. Why did this monument survive better than expected? Some archaeologists believe the Romans deliberately selected unusually dense stone containing mineral compositions more resistant to salt crystallization. Others suspect the surface may once have been coated with protective pigments or mineral treatments now mostly invisible to the naked eye. Roman builders were known to experiment with lime compounds, pozzolanic mixtures, and surface finishing methods capable of dramatically increasing durability. At sites across the empire, from aqueducts to harbours, Roman engineering repeatedly demonstrated an understanding of materials far ahead of many later civilizations. Marine Roman concrete has famously survived seawater for 2,000 years, while many modern concretes degrade within decades. Torre de los Escipiones raises a similar possibility on a smaller scale. Perhaps the stone itself was treated using methods no longer fully understood. The mystery becomes even more striking when compared to other ancient relief monuments. The sandstone facades of Petra have suffered massive erosion despite the dry desert climate. Numerous Maya carvings in humid Central America lost fine detail within centuries. Even parts of Roman coastal ruins elsewhere in Spain deteriorated more severely than this tower. Yet the figures here endured relentless humidity, wind, temperature shifts, and sea exposure while remaining recognizable enough to spark debate centuries later. Modern scans of the monument revealed additional anomalies in the construction itself. The tower, roughly 9 meters high, was assembled using carefully cut stone blocks fitted with unusual precision for a relatively small funerary monument. The joints between stones remain remarkably tight. There is little evidence of thick mortar compensating for irregularities. This matters because coastal terrain around Tarragona experiences long-term micro-movements and ground instability caused by moisture cycles and geological settling. Structures built with poor weight distribution gradually crack or lean under such conditions. But Torre de los Escipiones remained standing through Roman collapse, Visigothic occupation, medieval wars, earthquakes, and modern industrial expansion. Some engineers studying Roman masonry suggest the builders used advanced load-balancing principles normally associated with much larger ceremonial structures. Certain internal weight distributions may have reduced stress concentrations throughout the monument. Others speculate hidden stone-locking techniques were employed within the upper sections. The obvious question follows naturally. Why would Roman builders invest such precision into what appears to be a roadside tomb? That question becomes even stranger when examining the carvings themselves. The two giant figures are now believed by many historians not to be Roman generals at all, but representations of Attis, a deity connected to Eastern Mediterranean mystery religions. Attis originated in Phrygian belief systems from Anatolia and later spread through parts of the Roman Empire. The god was associated with death, rebirth, vegetation cycles, and funerary symbolism. If this interpretation is correct, Torre de los Escipiones may represent something far more unusual than a wealthy Roman burial monument. It could be evidence of Eastern cult practices reaching Hispania at a surprisingly early stage. This changes the entire meaning of the structure. Instead of a simple tomb, the tower may have functioned as a symbolic gateway connected to beliefs about rebirth and immortality. The placement beside the Via Augusta becomes more significant under this theory. Travelers entering or leaving Tarraco would encounter a monument linked not only to death, but possibly to spiritual transformation. Roman roads often served political and military purposes, but they also carried religions, rituals, and secret cult traditions across enormous distances. The tower may represent physical evidence of that cultural movement. The interior deepens the mystery further. Archaeological investigations failed to uncover clear human remains definitively linked to the monument. No rich burial chamber was discovered. No massive funerary treasure appeared. No inscription fully explains who commissioned it or who was supposed to rest inside. This absence is difficult to explain because elite Roman funerary monuments often emphasized identity and status. Wealthy families wanted names remembered. They used inscriptions, sculptures, and symbolism to project prestige into eternity. Yet here, the identity at the center of the monument remains almost invisible. One possibility is ancient looting. Tomb robbery was common throughout Roman history. Valuable grave goods were frequently stolen long before modern archaeologists arrived. Another theory proposes the monument functioned primarily as a cenotaph, a symbolic memorial rather than a true burial site. Some historians even suggest its role may have been more ritualistic than funerary. If Eastern cult symbolism truly existed here, the structure may have held ceremonial meaning beyond conventional Roman burial customs. Another major source of debate involves the damaged Latin inscription once carved onto the monument. Only fragments survived. Time erased crucial sections capable of identifying the owner, dedication, or precise function of the tower. Those missing letters created enormous interpretive gaps. Entire historical narratives now depend on incomplete words and broken grammar. This is one of the most frustrating realities in archaeology. Sometimes the disappearance of only a few centimeters of stone can erase the identity of an entire civilization's monument. Excavations and scholarly studies across the 19th and 20th centuries gradually transformed understanding of the site. Early antiquarians mainly focused on visual interpretation, producing sketches and speculative historical connections to the Scipio family. Later archaeological work examined construction techniques, carving styles, and Roman funerary architecture more scientifically. Researchers compared the monument to other Roman mausoleums across Hispania and the Mediterranean world. These studies revealed stylistic influences inconsistent with the original Scipio theory. Archaeologists also documented the monument's structural resilience in detail. Careful surveys showed that despite erosion, much of the core masonry remained exceptionally stable. Stone deterioration patterns suggested selective resistance rather than uniform decay. This fueled further speculation about quarry selection and Roman treatment methods. Each study produced more technical data, yet none fully solved the central mystery of preservation. In recent decades, conservation specialists used modern imaging and restoration analysis to monitor microscopic cracking and mineral weathering. Their findings confirm that the tower continues resisting environmental destruction more effectively than expected. The monument should theoretically display far greater surface loss after centuries of marine exposure. Instead, many critical sculptural features survived long enough for modern researchers to still analyze artistic style and iconography.